Okay, so for today we're going to discuss about the PHP forms, no? Includes PHP form validation, PHP form from required, PHP form URL and email, and PHP form complete. So I will show you a video presentations wherein there is a demonstration how you'll be able to apply all the PHP forms. Okay. So this will be an example of a PHP form handling.
Hello and welcome to a PHP Basics tutorial on form handling. In this tutorial I will be covering the basics of handling a form in PHP as well as how to code a form in HTML. So let's get started. First things first, I'm just going to open and close some HTML tags. I'm going to ignore my doc types for today, even though that's bad practice. Okay, so within your HTML, you can have open and close form. So that's just form in greater than, less than symbols, and then the regular closing, which is just a / after form. So within these tags, there are two main attributes that we are going to assign it. The first one being method, and the second one being action. So in method, there are two things you can be. It can be a post, or it can be get. I will be discussing the difference between these when I get to the PHP part of this tutorial. Action is the page which the form will submit to. So for instance, I could submit it to submitted data thingy.php, but I don't have that file, so I'm going to submit it to form_handling.php, which is the current file I'm working in, as you can see up here. But since it's the current file, I actually don't need to type in the file name. I can just enter a blank string, and that will submit to this page. Now, those are the two main attributes. It can take more, such as name, ID, that sort of thing, but we're only going to be using these two. Now, there are a number of elements within the form, the main one being input. An input self-end, so instead of having an input opening and input closing tag, you have input, and then instead of just closing it off normally, you have closing it off using a / and then the closing tag. This has a number of elements too. This time we are going to define name, type, and just name and type for this one. So in name, just like in all other HTML elements that have the name attribute, it's just an identifier for the specific name. So this one we're just going to name it text. And the name is very important once it comes to the PHP part of this tutorial. The type, there's a number of types, and if you've seen a video where they've used input before, then you would probably have seen input type text, or input type password, or input type radio. There's a number of them. I will link in the description to a page that talks about all the different input types. I may make a video on it later, but for this one, since it's mainly about PHP form handling, I'm going to set it to text. What this means is that we're going to have within our form an input that you can enter text data into. So if we refresh this page, you can see that we have a little box right here, and I can type into it. And this displays as regular text data. If I were to change this to password, and we refresh this page, it's still a text box, but when I type into it, it's starred out. And so that's the difference, but we're going to change that back to text and save. Now we're going to put in another input type. The type is going to be submit. The name will also be submit. And we're also going to assign this one a value. Now value is another attribute of the input tag. What this does is it assigns a predetermined value to the object that the page submits. So here I'm going to assign it the value of submit exclamation mark. Now I'm going to go back to here, refresh. First thing you'll notice we have the submit button. The submit, which is the value, has appeared on it. So that's the first noticeable place where value appears. But if I type something in here and click submit, if you look up here in the URL, I'm going to copy this and bring it into my notepad down here. Can ignore up to here. So we have, this is our page name, formhandling.php. We have a question mark. We have text, which as you can see is the name of the first input field, equals hey. Hey is what I typed into the text box. We then have an ampersand, which is the and symbol. Submit, which is the name of the submit, is equal to submit, which is the value I gave it. So as you can see, since we are using get, in the URL, each of the input type names is assigned the value that we give it. If you were to assign this an automated value, is equal to, and let's delete that and save. We'll refresh this now. You can see that text comes up here. If we submit, text is now in place of where hey is. If we change this to hey, we'll submit. Hey is now up there, but since the value is text, text goes back in the box. So that's the very basics of creating your HTML form, and I'm just going to remove the value here. Really, all you will ever need are your form and your inputs. They do get more complicated than that, but I'm leaving it at that for this tutorial. Now I'm going to start on the PHP. So we're going to open and close our PHP tags here. And as you remember, I mentioned this method right here. This method is the way which the server deals with the information that's being submitted. So the get variable, or the get method, as you can see, inserts it into the URL. The other method, post, if we just go back here, delete that, refresh, we now submit. You see it does not go into the URL, but the page has still submitted it. So that's the main visible difference, is that get submits to the URL, post does not. The other difference is based on the limitations of what you can submit. Post allows you to submit much more data than get does, and it's more powerful. Get has more restrictions on it and submits through the URL. If you want to know more information on this, you can check out documents online that describe in detail, but basically that is the difference. When dealing with it in PHP, it is assigned into what is generally referred to as a get or a post variable that is accessed using the dollar sign, underscore, and then post or get, respectively, depending on what your method is. Now and then it opens up square brackets, similar to how an array works. Within these square brackets, you open up quotes and you have the name of whatever fields you want to use. So for instance, if we want to access the text field, we would have dollar underscore post text. So let's just echo this out. And then refresh this page. And we'll resend the data. And you see we get hey. If we type in bye and submit, we echo out bye. Now if we were to change this method to get, and this to get, and we'll now refresh the page. We won't resend the data, so we'll refresh it that way. We get undefined index, don't worry about that error right now. We're just going to send hey again. You can see that we echoed hey in the same way that we did before, but hey is also up here. So it's the basics of how you access these variables. And the basics of the difference between get and post. Let's change this back to post, and let's change this back to post. So generally speaking, a form will be used so that the user can input data. So let's just say that we wanted to allow the user to enter their name. So we're gonna do a couple. I'm just gonna make this little code here to show you. First thing that we want to do is we want to check to see if the submit has been pressed. And the reason we do this is to avoid that error that we saw before where it said undefined index, because that was saying that the form has not been submit, basically. And so we want to avoid that error. So we're going to say if is set $post submit. If this is set, we want to do what's in this brackets. If it's not set, then we're going to do whatever. But so if it's set, we are going to say echo hello, and then underscore post text. So basically, we're going to get the user to enter their name in the text field, and if the text has been submitted, we're going to say hello to them. If it has not been, we will not say hello to them. So we're going to refresh this page. You can see that we don't get any errors, even though we are still echoing out that variable. Then I'm going to type in my name. My name's Dylan. So we'll go to click submit, and you get hello Dylan. It's a very basic use for the form, but it's to illustrate that, or the use of them. So just to quickly recap on what we've learned. So a form takes the main two attributes of method and action. Action is the page it submits to. Method is post or get, depending on how you want to send the data. The main inputs are, or the main elements are the input elements, and these take your name, which is the PHP identifier within the get and post variables. It's the identifying key. Then you can also have your type, which we've used submit and text. There are a number of different types, again linked to a guide for that in the description. And value, if you want it to have a predetermined value. If not, the value is assigned based on what the user inputs. Then within PHP, it is called using the underscore or $_ and then get or post, depending on the method you're using, and then in square brackets and quotes, the identifying key that you have, and that is where the value will be stored, assuming the value has been set by the page already. That is about it for this tutorial. I hope you learned something. Please feel free to ask me questions in the comment section below. I will do my best to answer them or find the answers for you. Please check out my other videos on my channel, and comment, rate, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.
Okay, so this time is PHP validation. So in PHP validation, this and the next is the on how to use PHP to validate from data. So it means to say that the HTML form will be working at on this discussion and contains various inputs fields required and optional text field, radio buttons, and a submit button. Okay.
Hello everyone and welcome to Simply Learn. Today we are going to have a video session on PHP form validation. So what does this actually mean? Okay, well let me give you an example here. So when you try to create an account on Facebook or Instagram, you submit a form and then that form is cross-verified with the code written in the backend. So today we are going to do the same process in this video. Now we will have a look at two demos. Now in the first demo we will create a form and in the second one we will validate it. So let's get started with the first demo. But first things first, let's quickly open C drive, XAMPP folder, htdocs and create a folder. Let's name it validation and open our code editor here. And let's create a first file, form.php. Now I'm going to write the code for the registration form. Now here what we are doing is we are creating the different variables for the form and we are setting it to empty values. Let me put that in a comment too. Now as you can see, the form will contain full name, email, number, comment, gender and age. Now for this demo, the username, email and mobile number fields will be text input elements while the comment field will be a text area. Let's write the rest of the code. Now we are defining the test input function which we are calling in the above if statement. Let's start creating the form and add the method to post. Action would be So I skipped ahead and created all the details required in the form. So the details would be full name, its input type would be text. Just wait, yeah, it's okay now. Second would be email, similarly number, age, comment. Now notice the comment would be a text area instead of a simple input type. Gender and a submit button. Now the form is complete. We have to write another PHP script to display the details. I'll just skip ahead in this part too. So now that we can display all of the variables from the form, let's close the PHP script and also close our form. Now let me explain some parts of the code to you before we move on to the web page part. So here we have post. So this function is used at the time of form submission. Now during that time, the form data is sent with method equals to post. Second would be the server section. Now this server PHP self is a global variable that returns the file name of the code. Now also HTML special characters function converts special characters to HTML entities. Now this prevents attackers from exploiting the code by injecting HTML or JavaScript codes. That is cross-site referencing scripting attacks in forms. So now that we know what these functions do, let us jump and see if our web page works okay. For that, first open XAMPP control panel and start the Apache server. And now let's open the browser and type localhost followed by the folder name. That would be validation and then a file name form.php. So yes, the form looks good. Let's add some name to it. Email xyz.com. Number is optional, but let's add some number to it. Age would be 20. Comment would be hello, welcome to Simply Learn. Gender would be male, and let's click here. Yes, so our input is visible and the form works perfectly. Now let's move on ahead with our second demo, that is validating a form. Now we will be writing a code but with slight variations. Now the fields like full name, email address and websites will be added here, and these three fields will show an error if an incorrect input is given. Now however, the code is validated against the input and returns an alert message if an incorrect data is entered. Let's go to the code editor and create another file, and let's name it validate.php and write another code for it. Now I've added some color for the error that will be shown into the form. Again, let us write comment for it, define variables and set to empty, and our variables would be name err, that is error. Similarly, email err, gender err, and the rest of the fields. Well, let's give the else command for it. Now, if no error found or the field entered is correct, the name will be displayed as we displayed the name in the form.php file. With the help of post name. Now what we are going to do is, now we will check if name only contains letters and white spaces. And this would be ERR. Now we will check if the email address is well formed or not. To do that, we will again use an if statement. I think I have used emi somewhere since it's showing here emai. So let's check before it throws an error in our code. There's email, yeah. Okay, we made a mistake here. So this else was not supposed to be closed here. Let's move it ahead. Yeah, I think this looks good. Let's write another code for another variable that is website, and do the same thing again. Website Now we will check if the URL address syntax is valid or not. So which is be a single Now we will write the test input function as we did in the form section. So let's just copy it from there since it's going to be the same. Now let's write the PHP script for the form validation section. Form method would be post. Action would be PHP script again. I'll just skip ahead with this part of the program. So now that we have our complete form here, let's close it. As you can see, we have entered full name, email address, website, comments, and gender parts to the form. Now let's write a final PHP script to display the details. Since this will also be similar to the last part, we will just copy it from there and make the necessary changes. So what we don't have is full name. This would be just name, email. This would be a website. There's no number. It's deleted. There's a comment and there's a gender. Let's close the script and also close our web page. Now let's save the file, open a browser and check if our web page is working correctly. Type localhost, the name of the folder and the name of your file. Okay, so let's write something mac xyz at the. Now let's not write something after it so that the email address would be wrong. Just to check, 123 dot c comment anything would do, gender male, and let's click on submit. So as you can see, it shows enter a valid website URL and the email address is incorrect. Let us also check by writing an incorrect name, that would be mac1, email address macxyz@ and 123.c. Now it's showing the error for the name too. Okay, let's write something that is correct. mac@gmail.com. Website would be www.simplylearn.com. Comment could be anything. Mail, and no errors here. As you can see, we have got the output. Now we have reached the end part of the video on the PHP form validation. I hope it was informative and interesting.
Okay, I will show you another example of the PHP and MySQL basic form validation. No? So this will be a new one wherein you could able to see another way on how you'll be able to use the form validation.
Alright then gang, so in this video I'd like to talk a little bit about form validation, but what do I mean by that? Well, by form validation I mean we need to validate the data that a user enters into this form after they click submit. Because if you think about it, a user could just type in a name here, not an email. They could leave this blank and leave this blank, click submit, and then we've got that data. We need to say, hey, we want to check this data. Is it the correct type? And have you actually entered in something at all? So that's what we're going to do. Now, we could use HTML5 validation on the front end, such as using the required attribute on our input fields, or by using input types, and that's always a good idea to do as well. But in this lesson, I want to focus on server-side validation using PHP. So once the form is submitted, the data is sent to the server, the file runs, and the data from the form is validated in PHP code up here. Now this is always a good step to take, as well as front-end validation, to make sure that the data you use in your app or save to a database is correct and it's the expected data. Okay, so we do receive an email when we want one. We do receive ingredients, etc. So then, first of all, we're checking if the form has been submitted and we have data. That's the first step, right? And then in here at the minute, we're just echoing this stuff to the browser and we're escaping any kind of malicious code using this function right here, HTML special chars. Now, the first thing I'd like to do is check that all of these fields right here are not empty. They all have to have something in them, okay? So we need to see if those are empty. What I'm going to do is just comment this stuff out for a minute, and we're going to do several different if checks, one for each form field. So I'm going to say check email first of all. That's a little comment so we know what everything is as we do it. And here I want to do an if check, and I'm going to use a function called empty, right? And then I'm going to pass in to this function $_post, and I want to get the email field. So I'm checking if this field is empty. If it's empty, it means there's nothing in it. The user's not typed anything. And if that's the case, we want to echo some kind of error because they have to type something. So we'll echo an email is required. And then we'll also echo a BR tag as well. Okay? So we're checking if the email is empty. If it is, then we're going to echo this error saying it's required. Else, this means it's not empty and it's fine. So in this case, we're just going to echo what the user types in for the email. So let's cut that from there and paste it down here. Does that make sense? If it's empty, then we want to send back an error. If it's not empty, then that's fine and we'll just send back what they typed in, just as confirmation for now. So we'll do this kind of check for each different field. So I'm going to copy that, paste it a couple more times. We're going to check the title right here, and we need to check the title field over here. And then we'll change this to a title is required. Oops, like so. And otherwise, if it has been entered and it's not empty, we'll just echo out the title from the post array. And then finally, we want the ingredients. And we'll say at least one ingredient is required if it's empty. And if it's not empty, then we'll just echo out those ingredients instead, just for confirmation, okay? So we'll just do a little comment right at the end as well. Let me delete these, we don't need those at the top anymore. We're going to do a little comment right here, just so we know that this is the end of the post check right here, okay? So then I'm going to save that and I'm going to give this a whirl and hopefully it should work. Now if I submit without entering any information, we can see an email is required, a title is required, at least one ingredient is required. So we'll enter in an email, we'll say yoshi@thenetninja.co.uk, then submit, and now we just get these two errors, but we also get the value right here. So this is valid. We've successfully entered something in. It might not be fully valid. We've not checked that it's actually an email, and we could just as easily type Yoshi here, submit it, and that would say, yeah, it's valid. But at least it has a value, whereas these two don't. If I type in the pizza title, just call it title, then you can see an email is required. We get title, and then at least one ingredient is required. We can do the same thing here. In fact, what I'm going to do is just a load of stuff like that. Submit it all, and we don't get any errors. We just get a combined load of junk, which is all of the values together, okay? So that's the first step of our basic validation. We've checked that those fields have actually got something in them, but we need to do a bit more. We need to check that this is actually an email, okay, and not just some random string of letters. We need to check maybe that this is a title. Maybe a bit looser validation on that, but we need to check that this is a comma separated list of ingredients, and that could be tricky as well. So what we're going to do is use filters and a bit more validation in the next tutorial to do that. And I want to warn you, I am going to be using a bit of regex to do this. Now, you don't need to know regex. I'm going to give you the regex codes to verify these different things. But if you want to learn about it, I do have a whole tutorial series on regex on this very channel. So the link will be down below in this video and the next video as well. So you can check that out there.
Okay, so as what we have here, so this will be a PHP and MySQL. This time we're going to have a filters and more validation.
Alright then gang, so far we're doing some very basic validation to check that an input field actually has a value when a user clicks submit, but we're still not checking if that value is the correct type. Like this could be a name and I could click submit and that's valid in the eyes of this form so far. We want to check that that actually is an email. This is a title and this is a comma separated list of ingredients. So we need to validate those things on the server inside this script. Now, the way we're going to do that in PHP is by using a combination of things. First of all, we're going to use some filters, or rather a filter, to validate the email. And filters are built into the PHP language to help us validate things like this. Now, PHP only has filters for certain things. Emails are one of them, but they don't have a filter for a comma-separated list or a title. So we need to validate this ourselves, and for that we're going to use some regular expressions. Now, I'm not going to focus in this video about what regular expressions are. That's something separate from PHP. We use them in all languages, and for me to delve right into that would take about 15 lessons in itself. I do have a whole series on regex, regular expressions, and if you want to learn more about them and how to use them to validate certain things, then I'm going to leave the link to that series down below and you can go and check those out, okay? And that will really help you when you work with forms in any programming languages, okay? So either way, we're going to use a built-in filter to validate the email from PHP, and then we're going to use a function to use some regular expressions to validate the title and the ingredients, all right? So it sounds complex. It's not overly complex, but let's try it. So first of all, the email. So then, so far we're checking it's not empty. And if it's not empty, it's echoing out the email. Now I don't want to do that anymore. Instead, what I'm going to do is create a new variable. I'm going to call that email and I'll set it equal to $_post and then email. So we're grabbing that value from the post array now, the value that was submitted to us. That's if there's something in it, okay? And we're storing that now inside email. I'm doing this because we might be using this a few times going forward over the next tutorials, and now we have it handily stored in this variable. Okay then, so now I'm going to check that this is of the correct structure. It is actually an email, and that's what I'm going to use a PHP filter for. So we'll do an if check, and then we're going to use a method called filter_var, so filter variable. So inside this method or this function is going to take two parameters. First of all, the value that we want to check, which is this thing right here. So the email, right? That's what we're going to check. So we're going to copy that and paste it in as the first argument. The second argument is going to be the type of filter that we want to apply. Well, we want to apply the filter_validate_email. So that, like I said, that filter is built in to PHP. So we're passing these two things into the function. So what that function is going to do is take this value that a user enters and pass it through this validate email filter, and that is going to make sure that this is a valid email. So it has an @ symbol in it, then it ends in something like .co.uk or .com. Okay, it's a valid email. That's going to check it for me. Now, if it is a valid email, that's going to return true, and this code is going to execute right here. Now, what I want to do is echo something out if this is not true, okay? If there's a problem with it, because then I want to echo out some kind of error. So if this returns true, then this code's going to fire. Now, I could do an else statement to fire something else, but then we'd be placing nothing inside this if statement, and that's a waste of coding space, I think. So instead, I'm going to place the negation operator in front of this right here. Now remember, when we looked at comparisons and booleans and things like that, if we placed the negation operator in front of the equals, it says is not equal to. It kind of reversed it, okay? So what this is going to do is reverse whatever comes after it. So if this returns true and the email is actually valid, then if we put this in front of it, it's going to turn that true value into false, okay? So if it's valid, then this if statement will evaluate to false. However, if it's not valid and this statement returns false, then the whole thing with the negation operator in front of it is going to return true, and then we can fire what's in here, okay? So now we can put the error inside here, and the error is going to fire when the validation does not pass. So the error I want to place is going to be email must be a valid email address. And looks like I'm shouting at them there, so let me do that again. It must be a valid email address. Okay, so I hope all that makes sense that I just explained to do with this negation operator and what this returns. We're going to do a similar thing now with the other fields, but before we do that, let me just check if this works. So what I'm going to do now is refresh the page first of all. In fact, I'm going to press enter and we get an error. That's probably because we've missed off our semicolon somewhere. We have schoolboy error. So let me save that again and I'm going to refresh. And now if I type something in like Sean, then submit, we can see the email must be a valid email address. All right. So we know that this is not valid. However, if I type in Sean at thenetninja.co.uk and click submit, then we shouldn't get that error. Perfect, because that is valid. So that works. Okay, then that's the first step done. Whew. Now we need to check these two things, and that's title, not tile. We need to check these two things. First of all, the title, and secondly, the ingredients. Now, we used a built-in filter right here, the filter validate email. PHP had that included in the language. It doesn't have one for a title because there's no set kind of validation for a title, is there? And it doesn't have one to validate a comma separated list, at least I don't think so. So we're going to have to validate these ourselves using a different kind of function and some regex. Okay, like I said, regex is not going to be covered properly in this course. If you want to learn about it, I'll leave the link down below. But essentially what regex does, or regular expressions do, is they look at a string of characters and they match it to a pattern described by the regular expression. And if that pattern matches what's in the string, then it's going to pass the test. If it doesn't match, then it's not going to pass the test. For example, in title, we could create a regular expression pattern that must include uppercase letters, lowercase letters, and maybe spaces only. If it's got any kind of special characters, like an @ symbol, then it's not going to pass. So we're going to create a regular expression to test for that pattern. Now we're going to do a similar thing to up here. First of all, we're going to delete this, and we're going to store the title inside a little variable called title. We'll grab it from $_post and grab the title from that post array. Okay, then we're going to do an if check, and in here the function this time is not going to be filter var, but it's going to be preg_match. Okay, so preg match, if you like this. And this is how we match something to a regular expression. It takes two parameters. The first parameter this time is the regular expression that we want to match it against. And the second parameter is going to be the title itself. Okay? So then, in here, the regular expression, I'm just going to copy this from my GitHub repo. Remember, you can get this as well. It's lesson 20 in the branch dropdown, and I'm going to paste it in there. So we place it in quotes. It starts and ends with a /, and this is the regular expression. So we're saying right here, from the start to the end, that's what these symbols means. We want any lowercase, uppercase, or spaces right here as many times as the user wants. So it can be any length, at least one character long. Okay, that's what that regular expression means. So the second argument we need to pass in here is the title itself. That's what we're going to match it against, all right? Okay then, so if it passes this regular expression, it's going to return true. Again, we want to only output an error if it's false. So we need to negate it here for the same reason as up here. All right then, so now we'll echo the error, and that error is going to be title must be letters and spaces only. Okay? Okay, cool. So now we have that error. Let's give this a whirl. I'm going to place in a valid email. I'll just say a@b.com, one of the simplest emails you can get. And the pizza title is going to be blah at 123. Now, we have an at symbol in here and 123. They're not valid for a title. We didn't say that in the regular expression. So this should echo out the error. I'm going to submit. And now we can see the title must be letters and spaces only. Okay, so let's give this a whirl again. a@b.com. This time for the title, I'll say Ninja Supreme. Sounds like a good pizza. Submit. And now we only get this error. At least one ingredient is required. So this passed this time. Okay. We're going to do a very similar thing using the same function for the comma separated list of ingredients. So let me just copy all that stuff there, delete this junk, and place this in instead. Now, I want to replace this with ingredients and also this with ingredients from the post array. And then we want to replace this with ingredients as well. And we want to match against a different type of regular expression here. I'm going to delete that, and I'm going to grab the other one from my repository as well. It's a bit longer, this one. I'm going to copy it and paste it over here. Again, you can see it's a long regular expression, starts with a /, ends with a /, and this is looking for a comma separated list, okay? Again, if you want to learn more about regex, check out my other playlist on that, and you'll know exactly how I've done this, okay? So anyway, that there is going to check that this ingredient string is a comma separated list of words, if you like, okay, which is what ingredients are, words. Now, again, we're using the negation operator because if it passes, it's true. We want to negate that so that we only echo out an error if this returns false, all right? And the error this time is going to be ingredients must be a comma separated list. All right. So if I save this now, what I'm going to do is say a@b.com. We'll call this the triple B. Really exciting. And then we'll just do something random in here like tomato at semicolon, right? That's not a valid ingredient. So let's submit, and it says ingredients now must be a comma separated list. All right, let's try this again. a@b.com, pizza title CCC, we're taking it up a notch, and then the ingredients is going to be tomato, cheese, and mushrooms. Okay, submit. This is valid, right? Submit, and now no error. So that there, my friends, is all our basic validation for this form pretty much done. If this was a real life application, maybe you do a bit more validation as well. This will do for this project. Okay, so now we've got the validation done. In the next video, what I'd like to do is take the errors that are currently being shown here and show them in the form instead. And also, if we enter in something that's valid, like a@b.com, and the pizza title, which could be DDD, if we then do something that's not valid here, these two are valid, right? So if we submit, we should get the errors, but those two values should remain there the second time around, so the user doesn't have to type them out again. That's just a pain to do. So I'm going to show you how we can persist that data in the form as well and show the errors underneath the relevant form fields.
Okay, so this time the PHP and MySQL by showing errors, no, and for in a form.
Okay then, so we've created our form validation now in the PHP, and at the minute we're echoing these errors, if there are any errors, at the top of the page up here. Now we don't really want to do that. We want to echo out those errors in the form itself underneath the form field which has an error. So let's go about doing that. First of all, we need to somehow store the error in a variable so that we can output that variable down here in the template, right? So instead of echoing this right here, I'm going to store each one of these in a variable. Now, I'm not going to store each one in its own unique variable. What I'm going to do is create a variable at the top called errors, and I'm going to set this equal to an array. Now, this array is going to be an associative array. We'll use the array keyword just to mix it up a little bit, and then inside what I'm going to do is create a position for each one of these things. We have one for email, one for the title, and one for the ingredients. So the keys are going to be email, title, and ingredients. So the email to begin with is going to be an empty string because we don't have an error to begin with. So there's going to be nothing in here when the PHP first starts. We're just kind of creating this value ready in the array just in case there is an error with the email, or the title, which we're going to do second. So that's going to be an empty string to begin with as well. And then thirdly, the ingredients, which will also be an empty string to begin with. So we have this array now of errors, but there's no errors at the minute. All we're going to do now is update each of these positions, the values of these positions, with the error down here. So in this case, this is the email. So I'm going to grab the errors and update the email pocket, if you like, from the errors, and that is going to be equal to this string right here. Now I'm going to do the same thing for the title. So we'll say errors, and then in brackets, or square brackets rather, the title, and that is going to be equal to this string. And then finally we have the ingredients. So again, errors, and we're updating the ingredients, and that is going to be equal to this string. So hopefully all that makes sense. We're just making an errors array with empty values at the minute, so no errors to begin with. And then if we have any errors, it's going to update those positions right here in the array. So now we can output those to the form. So what I'm going to do underneath each input field is another div, a separate div. And that div is going to have a class of red-text, just so it stands out a little bit. An error's mainly red on a web page, right? So let's do our PHP tags right here because we're going to output some dynamic content here. All we're going to do is echo, and we want the error here for the email. So we'll get the errors, and we want the email position, okay? So we're echoing out that error right there. Now I'm going to just copy this dude and paste it down beneath the title and also the ingredients, and then we just need to update these things, the title and the ingredients, right? All right then, so I'm going to save this and I'm going to go over here and refresh. Then I'm going to type nothing to begin with. I'll just submit, and now we can see all of these things here. Okay, I'm going to refresh once again. In fact, let me just go to add and then refresh because I don't think we've caught any changes. Let me try this again, submit. Okay, we still get those errors up there. I've just remembered why that is. We have more than one type of error. We have this error right here, but we also have these errors at the top if the field is empty. So again, I'm just going to update this so that the errors position becomes this string rather than just directly echo it out. Okay, so we want the title being updated over here and set that equal to this string. And then finally the ingredients. So let's grab that and paste that up here as well. Okay, cool. So now we're updating both of those errors if it's empty or if there's a problem with the type of data we're getting back. So now, fingers crossed, if we go to this page and we don't enter in any information, click submit, now we get those errors right here. Cool. So if we type in something that's not valid, I'm going to submit, and now we can see email must be a valid email address. Okay. Now we could do the title, we'll say Mario Supreme, and we'll do an ingredient which is not valid, so something like this, and then press submit. You can see we don't get an error here under the ingredients, but we get this updated error down here. So this all seems to be working. Okay, so you'll notice even though this was valid, when it comes back it's missing, and even when it's not valid it still shouldn't be emptied. We should be able to amend that value. So I want to persist the data that the user types in and keep it here when the page comes back to us so we can just update them. all right, rather than those values being deleted. So to do that, we just need to output the title variable, don't we? The ingredients variable and the email variable down in the template, because remember, that's the data we're getting back that the user typed in. So let's try doing that. What I'm going to do is for the value of each input, I'm going to say that is equal to, and then we need some PHP. So let's do that. And we're going to echo out the variable that we need. So in this case, it's going to be the email variable, because remember, up here, we say email is equal to this, okay? So we're grabbing that from the form when the user enters it in, and we're setting it equal here. So we should be able to output it to the template, right? Let's do the same thing for the other fields, then we'll test it. So let me come down here and change this to title. And finally come down here and we'll change this one as well to ingredients. And what I'm going to do is save that, and I'm just going to refresh the page, or rather go to the same address again, and we should get an error. You see here, that's not what we expected, right? Undefined variable title, undefined variable ingredients. So it's saying to us, look, you come to this page and you want the value of these input fields to be this variable. However, this variable is undefined at this moment in time. But why is that? Because we define them up here, don't we? Right? Well, think about it. When we first go to the page, we've not yet submit the form, and we're trying to load these variables. Now, they've not been set yet because we've not submit the form. This code here only ever runs once the form has been submit. So currently, we're not setting these variables until we have a form submission. So the first time we come to here, we're going to get these undefined variable errors, and that's not very good. So what we should do is initialize our variables up here to be empty strings to begin with, so that the first time a user lands on the page, then we output those variables. We're just outputting empty strings inside these different input fields, right? So they'll be blank. Then when a user clicks submit, we're updating those variables over here, and then when the template is sent back to the user, it's updated in these values with those variables. I hope that makes sense. So what we're going to do just above errors is create or initialize these variables. I'm going to say that the title is equal, and here's a little trick. If we're setting all of them to the same value, which we are doing here, we're setting them all to a blank string, we can just say the title is equal to the email, which is equal to the ingredients, and that is going to be equal to an empty string. So we're setting them all here to an empty string, okay? So to begin with, that should work. So I'm going to go to add again, and now we don't get those errors, we just get empty strings. But this time, if I type in Sean and pizza title of something like this, which is totally not valid, ingredients, something similar, then we're going to get errors on all of these. Submit it, but you see now, these values, they persist, they stay on the form. So that's a better user experience. I'm going to update these now, the netninja.co.uk. I'm going to make a valid title. I'll call it the Ninja Supreme. I'm going to keep this one the same. Submit it. Notice the errors have gone here now, but we have this error still here, but it still stays. Now I'm going to update this with something that is valid. Tomato, cheese, and tofu. And submit. And now we get no errors. So, my friends, this now is all working. That's really good. We've done our validation. We're displaying any errors. And we're also showing the data that they initially typed in. So we're not deleting it each time around, we're persisting that data. Now I think the next step would be to redirect the user. If all this form is valid, like it is now, and they've submitted it, then we should redirect them back to the home page to show them that, yeah, it's been done, okay? Afterwards, we're going to save the data to a database and then redirect them to the home page. But for now, I just think redirect them, because that says to me, yeah, we've accepted this form, now I'm taking you back to the homepage. So we're going to do that, my friends, in the very next video. One extra thing I want to do before I close off this video is add on the HTML special chars function around these different values that we output to the browser. We're doing it inside this value attribute, but it doesn't matter. We still should do this when we're outputting information that a user has input themselves, because you never know, that could be malicious code and we want to escape any of those special characters. So make sure whenever you're outputting anything to the browser, we always use this. Let me do this down here as well and enclose those in brackets, and then finally the ingredients, and close that in brackets down here as well. Cool. So that is better. Now we're echoing these out, but we're enclosing them in HTML special chars.
Okay, so this time that is also PHP form redirecting.
Alright then, my friends, so this is coming along pretty swimmingly. Now if there are any errors, we're showing them here on the form. If there's no errors, what we need to do now is redirect the user to the home page. Okay, so that's what we're going to do in this video. So if we go to the PHP code, right now what we need to do, when a user submits the form, all this code runs right at the bottom of this code. Then what we need to do is check, are there any errors? If there's not any errors, that means the form is valid. And it means that then what I'm going to do is redirect that user to the home page or some other page. And if there are errors, then I'm actually not going to do anything. I just won't do the redirect, because if I don't do anything, then we're going to have those errors populated inside this array. And then when we send the template back to the user, it's going to show those errors right here. Okay? So that's the steps that we need to take. At the bottom, first of all, we need to check, are there any errors? Okay then, so how are we going to do this? Well, we're going to use a method called array_filter. And we're going to pass in the errors array. That's the array we defined at the top with any potential errors inside them. Now, how does this work, this function, array filter? Well, array filter cycles through our array and it performs some kind of callback function on each one. We can define the callback function in here. Now, if we don't define a callback function, it still cycles through the array. And if all the positions in that array are empty or evaluate to false, which remember, an empty string does in loose comparison, then this statement itself will evaluate to false as well. Now, if there are errors that are not empty inside it, then it will evaluate as true. So that's a nice little way to check an error array to see if there are any errors inside it. Okay? So remember, if there are no errors inside this, it will return to false. So when it returns to false, it means we don't have an error. If it returns true, it means we do have an error. So if it returns true, what we're going to do for now is say echo, there are errors in the form. Okay? Spell this correctly, form. If it returns false, then we'll do an else statement, and returning false means that there's no errors here. For now, we'll just echo form is valid. Alright, so I hope that makes sense what we've just done there. So now let's go over to the form itself, and I'm going to just submit this, and we see that the form is valid. There's no errors here. But if I start to do something that's not valid here and submit it, we can see now we have errors in the form, and we do right here. So now we've made that little check, we can see if there's any errors in the error array using this array filter method. Now what we want to do, instead of echoing something out, we want to redirect the user. Now we don't want to redirect them here. We want to in fact do nothing here, because at this point there's errors. And if there's errors, we don't want to do anything. We just want to carry on down the file, make up the HTML template and send that back to the user with those errors so they can correct them. Now then, if there's no errors, that's when we want to take action. That's when we want to redirect them right here. So how do we redirect a user? Well, we use a very simple method called header, and then inside that we pass in a little string that says location, and that will be to the index.php. So all we're saying is we want the location to go now from here to the index.php file. So on the server, we're now going to go to the index.php file, run this, and send that back to the browser instead of this at the bottom. That's if there's no errors. So let's save this, and I'm going to carry on with an error. I'll put something down here as well, so there's multiple errors. Submit it. Okay, we're not redirected, but if we take those errors away, if we make this correct and then submit it, now we go to the index. Look at that. So that's fine. Now in the future, instead of just redirecting to the index here, what we're going to do is save the data to the database. So we'll do that first, then we'll redirect to the index, okay? Because we want to only save data to the database if it's valid. And this is where we're going to do it. So I hope that makes sense. That's how we easily check for errors using array filter, and then redirect using this header function right here.
Okay, so this time I just want to show you on how to create a login system in PHP programming. Okay.
Today, you're going to learn how to make a login system completely from scratch. And before we get into this episode, it's very important that you listen to this short introduction here, because we're going to talk about how we're going to make this login system, because there is many different ways you can make a login system. So I'm going to explain specifically which way we're going to do it in this episode. What we're going to do in this episode is we're going to create a basic login system using procedural programming, not object-oriented programming. This guide is also going to be a beginner's guide, meaning that if you haven't done a lot of PHP before, this is going to be a very easy to understand guide where I'm going to explain everything from scratch, so you don't have any sort of questions when it comes to the PHP code or how to make the login system when we do actually program it in this episode here. After this episode, I'm also going to upload other episodes that are going to continue on this login system here. For example, how to create a forgotten password system, or how to create a profile page for the users in this website we're building here. So I'm going to have other episodes that I'm going to upload to my channel, and I will go ahead and leave a link in the description once I do actually have those episodes ready, so you can just go ahead and find them in the description of this video here. Now, in case you already know a bit about connecting to databases using PHP, I do have some additional info that you need to know before you get into this episode. Now, if you're completely new at creating PHP code, just go and ignore this next part, because it's only going to confuse you even more, and it's not something you need to think about right now until you get a little bit better with PHP. We will be using MySQLi in order to connect to our database in this lesson here. Do bear in mind, MySQLi is not the same thing as MySQL. MySQL was outdated 3 years ago. MySQLi is the newest version and do still work today and is relevant today, because MySQLi is the newest version and is what we need to use today if you're not using PDO to connect to database and that sort of thing. So MySQLi is not outdated, and it's what we're going to use in this episode here. So what this means is that we're not going to be using PDO in order to connect to our database in this episode. Now, a lot of people mistakenly think that PDO is a procedural programming thing. It is not. PDO is actually designed to be with object-oriented programming. And I do know that you technically can use PDO with procedural programming and it will work, but it is not designed for it. So we're not going to be using it in this episode. However, I will have separate video lessons on how to create a login system using PDO with object-oriented programming and MySQLi with object-oriented programming. So I will have that in a separate episode, and I'm also going to link that in the description in case you need to see it, when I do actually get around to making those episodes, of course. Now, I do also want to mention that when it comes to security in a login system, in this video I'll show you how to protect yourself against SQL injection, as well as how to hash your passwords when you upload users' passwords to the database. So even if a person were to gain access to the database, they can't even read the password. So there's a little bit of security in this episode here, and do bear in mind there's always a lot of things you can do to add security to a login system. And lastly, I want to welcome back the people who are new at PHP programming, because now it's relevant for you again. I do want to mention that this is going to be a long video, so if you want to take a few coffee breaks, you're more than welcome to. But I do promise that this is going to be one of the easiest guides on how to create a login system that you can find. At least that's what I'm aiming for it to be. So I do hope that you enjoyed this video here. Oh, and one more thing, if you want to skip ahead in this video, I do have timestamps in the description, so do go ahead and skip ahead if you don't need to, for example, know how to create the HTML markup in order to create a login system. So just go ahead and take a look in the description if you're not completely beginner when it comes to PHP code. So now that we went through all that, I can actually go ahead and close down my notes that I wanted to talk from in order to make this beginning intro. As you can see in front of me here, I do have a couple of different things open. I do have a text editor with a couple of different documents. What I simply did here is I took a basic index.php page with just a basic startup, and I split it apart and put the top part of my document inside a header.php. I put the main content inside a index.php file, and then the footer I inserted into a footer.php document, and then I simply link to the header and the footer inside my main document, which is the index.php page. This is a very normal thing to do when it comes to creating any sort of PHP website. Again, if this is completely new to you, I do recommend you go back and watch my PHP course before you learn how to create a login system, because you do need to know the basics of PHP before you get into this episode here. What we're going to do is I'm going to make sure I have my XAMPP or MAMP or whatever program you might be using started, so we do have access to a server on our computer, a local server if you could have that. If you don't know how to install XAMPP or MAMP or any sort of program, then I do have a tutorial I will also link in the description that will explain how to get a server started on your computer so you can have a database on your computer as well. So go ahead and watch that episode. It is a very easy guide. It takes literally 2 minutes to set up a server. It doesn't hurt your computer at all. So go ahead and watch that video if you're a little bit confused about setting up a server on your computer. It is not that complicated, even though for beginners it might sound complicated to set up a server. This is basically all I did to get prepared for this episode. So what we're going to do is I'm going to start the HTML and CSS markup in order to create something inside the website here. So when you want to create a login system, there's a couple of different things we need. We need to have a login form at the top of the website. At least that's what we usually have, a login form. We do also need to have a logout button. And we do also need to have a sign up form inside the website where a new user can go into the sign up form and type in their information and then get signed up inside the website. So that we need to create using HTML and CSS. And again, you should know HTML by now, so this is not really something I should go in depth explaining. So we're just going to go ahead and I'm just going to go ahead and talk and then write it out so you can see what I'm doing and hear me say it at the same time. I'm not going to go into deep detail about anything unless it's related to PHP code. So going into our header document, I do actually have my notes on the side here just in case you're wondering, because I want to make as few mistakes as possible. So inside my header.php document, we're going to go ahead and set up the navigation at the top of the website that will have some basic things inside of it, like a logo, a menu, and then of course we're going to have a login form. So I'm just going to really quickly set that up. So going inside the header that I have here, I am going to create a navigation tag or a navigation element, and inside the navigation I want to include a anchor tag that is going to have just a basic logo for the website inside of it. So I'm just going to include a image that I do, by the way, have inside my root folder. So as you can see, I have my documents here. I do also have a style sheet that I'm not going to apply until the end of the video when we do actually have the whole thing set up. Actually, we could apply it after the HTML. So I'll go ahead and do that. Just know that you shouldn't get confused about me adding styling to the website. It's not going to work any differently, it's just going to look differently. By the way, if you want to have access to my lesson files from this episode, including very specific describing comment that says what code does what inside the files, you can go ahead and download them from my Patreon in the description for this video. Just so you know that it's down there and ready to get downloaded if you want to support me on Patreon. But like I said, the styling doesn't have any impact on how the login system works in this episode. It's only going to be visual. So if you want to style the website, you can go ahead and just do that yourself, or you can get access to my files on Patreon. Just know that the styling doesn't really matter when it comes to functionality of the login system. It's only going to be a bonus thing for this episode. So getting back into what I was trying to do here, as you can see, I do have a image folder inside the root of my website, and inside the image folder I have a very basic logo that I'm going to include inside the header of my website here, just to have something that looks like a normal website, because it is nice to have something that looks like a normal website when you do these sort of tutorials. So I'm just going to go ahead and link to it here. So I'm going to say the image source is going to be inside an image folder, and it's going to be called logo.png. Then I'm just going to go ahead and include logo inside the alt tag here. And now that we have this, we can actually go ahead and go down to the next section here. I'm going to create an unordered list, and I'm just going to create a very basic navigation for the website, just to have something filled into the website that looks normal. So I'm going to say we have a anchor tag, and inside the anchor tag, I'm just going to go and include some text. I'm going to say home, then I'm just going to go ahead and copy paste. I think we should have about 4 different navigation items. I'm going to say we have something called portfolio. I'm going to have something called, let's go ahead and say about me. And then something called contact. Again, just to fill something in. And I'm going to go ahead and change the home link to index.php. So now that we just created some basic things for the website, I'm going to go ahead and include the login form and the logout form that we have inside the header that allow for us to type in some information, then click login, and as well as log us out if we are logged in already. So right below the UL tag, I'm going to include a div tag, and I'm just going to go ahead and include both forms inside of here, so we can sort of group them together inside one HTML element. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a form tag. Again, this is just a basic form tag, so you shouldn't be confused by anything here if you already know HTML and CSS. The action should not be index.html. Instead, the action tag is going to send the user to a PHP file that is going to run through a script that is going to determine if this user is the correct user who is trying to log in. If the user is the correct person, then we're going to log them into the website. So we're going to link to a PHP file that is going to have a bunch of PHP code inside of it. And don't worry, we will get to that file and create it together in just a few minutes. So we're going to link to a folder inside our website root folder called includes, and we're going to link to a file called login.inc.php. And the method is just going to be a post method. Do bear in mind, anytime you send sensitive data using a form inside a website, you need to use a post method, because if you use a post method, you can't see the information inside the URL. If you use a get method, you can see everything. So it's not really safe when it comes to sensitive data. Now, I should also mention the reason that I want to create a includes folder inside my root folder. Let's actually go and do that together right now. If I were to go back to the root part of my root folder, if I were to right click and create a new folder, I'm going to create this includes folder. The only reason for this folder is that I want to include any kind of pages inside the website that is not a direct page inside the website that the user can actually visit. Because these are going to be PHP documents that are only going to run a script and the user is not actually going to see this page inside the website, I want to put them inside a common folder. And I'm just going to call this one includes. So inside the includes folder is where we're going to insert the file that is going to have the login script. We're going to include the file that is going to have the sign up script and also the logout script. So we're going to include that inside the includes folder. The reason I decided to call my file login.inc.php is just for naming purposes. The .inc does nothing except for as part of the name of the document. The basic idea behind the .inc inside the name is just that it stands for include file. So I'm just going to include that as part of the name. So we know that this is not a page that the user can visit inside the website, but it just has some scripts inside of it. So now that we have this, we can actually go and fill in the inputs we need to have inside the form. So I'm just going to go and create an input. And here we need to decide what do we want the user to give us in order to log into the website. Now the most typical is that they just need to give us a username or email and a password. So that's what we're going to include in this episode here. So I'm going to give the name or set the name to mail UID. And the name attribute here is something we're going to use when we do actually send this information from the form to the login.inc.php file, because the name is going to be what we need to refer to in order to grab the information from this input. So the name here is very important to have inside your inputs. I'm going to go ahead and just delete the value and put a placeholder instead. And placeholder and value does two separate things. Again, that's basic HTML. You should know what they do. So I'm just going to go ahead and say that this is a username or email dot or something, so the user knows what to put inside this input here. Then I'm going to copy it, paste it below, and I'm going to change the type from text to password, because then when the user starts filling in any sort of text inside the password field, they can't actually see what they type in. It's just going to be those star symbols. And the name is going to be changed to PWD, and the placeholder should be password. Then I'm just going to go ahead and include a button at the bottom here. And the type should be a submit type, because this is what we use to submit the form. The name is going to be login-submit. And then I'm just going to go ahead and say login inside the button name. Now the next thing we need to include is a link right after this login form that can take the user to a sign up page where they can type in their information, such as their name, their email, their username, passwords, and that sort of thing, and then get signed up inside the website. So we're just going to include a very basic link. So I'm going to say we have an anchor tag, and I'm going to link to a signup.php page. And again, this is not a include file, because this is a page that you can actually visit inside the website. So it's just going to be signup.php. And then I'm just going to write sign up, like so. Then the last thing we're going to do inside the header document is we're going to include the logout button. Now, when we do get the login system working, we do need to hide the logout button when the user is not logged into the website. And we need to hide the login button when the user is already logged into the website. And we do that using PHP once we do actually make the login system. So we'll get to that at one point. So right after the link that we have down here, I'm just going to go ahead and include another form. And we could actually just copy paste from what we have up here, because it will have a little bit of the same inside of it. And I'm going to delete the inputs because we don't need those. I will go ahead and link to a logout.php instead, because this is just going to be a include file that will log the user out and send them back to the front page. So this is a include file. The method is going to be either post or get, doesn't really matter, because we don't have any sort of sensitive data down here. And the button is going to be called something else. So we're just going to call it logout-submit, and then we're going to change the name to logout. And that is a basic logout form. So now that we have all of this, we just need to include one more thing inside the HTML in order to get it everything that I want to have inside the website, which is that inside the index.php file, inside the main text that I have here, which is going to contain the main content for the website, I just want to include a basic piece of text like a paragraph that says if the user is logged in or logged out. So inside the main tags, I'm just going to go ahead and say that we have a logout message. So you are logged out. And then once we do log in, I want to have another paragraph that says you are logged in. Now again, do bear in mind, once we do have the login system up and running, we will, using PHP, hide one of these depending on if the user is logged in or logged out. So for now, we're just going to have both messages in here. So this is the basic HTML, and the last thing I want to do before we get into the PHP code is I want to activate my style sheet. So my style sheet, again, if you want to have the exact same styling as me, go ahead and download the lesson files in the description. If not, then just go ahead and include your own styling and make it into whatever you want it to look like inside the website here. Again, right now it looks kind of messy. If I were to just refresh it, you can see we have just a bunch of very basic things. So when I do activate my style sheet, like so, and I'm also going to go ahead and include my all the different classes and such I had inside my different tags in here. So I'm just going to do that really quick. And as you can see, I just added a couple of different classes to all the different elements we have in here, just so I could style it using CSS. And I went ahead and activated my CSS style sheet up here. So if we go ahead and go back to the website, you can see, as you can see, we do have some basic styling going on in here, just so we have something that looks just a little bit nice when it comes to the header up here with the forms inside of it. I did actually forget to style this down here inside the main content, so I'm just going to go and do that as well. And as you can see, we now have the content inside the main page styled as well. Now, what we need to do before we get into the PHP part is we need to also do something inside the sign up page that we included inside the header, because we do also need the user to be able to sign up inside the website. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a new document. I'm going to save it inside my main part of the root folder. And I'm just going to save it as signup.php. Then inside this document here, we're going to go ahead and just include the code or the markup that we need in order for the user to go to a sign up page and then see a form where they can sign themselves up, just like the form we have inside the header. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and just copy the index page, because there is a little bit of things in here that we do need to have repeated. So I'm just going to paste it in. And the part that we need to keep in here is going to be the top part where we require the header, as well as the footer that we have down at the bottom here. Then what I'm going to do is inside what we have inside my HTML markup. Now you probably won't have these specific tags here, just go ahead and ignore that. Just know that you need to have some sort of main wrapper or something to have the content inside of. So just, if you have the main tags here, it's fine. You can just have that and it's going to be all good. Inside the tags here, I'm going to include a form that the user can actually use in order to sign themselves up into the website. So first of all, I'm going to include a h1 tag that is going to say sign up, so the user knows what this specific page is for. And then below here, I'm going to create a form. And I'm just going to go ahead and set my action to be signup.inc.php. And again, we do need to remember that this is going to be inside a includes folder inside my root folder. So we're going to say includes / and then the method is going to be a post method as well, because this is going to be sensitive data that the user sees inside the website. So inside the form, we're going to include any sort of inputs we want the user to fill in, so we can save that information inside our database, which we haven't created yet, but we'll get to that as well. So I'm going to include a input field. And inside the input field, I first of all would like the user to type in their email. So I'm going to set the name tag to UID, and we're not going to have a value, we're going to have a placeholder. And I'm going to set this one to username. Then I'm going to just copy paste, and I'm going to do the same thing, except this time I want them to include their email. So I'm going to set the name attribute to mail, and then I'm going to set it inside the placeholder to email. Then I'm just going to go ahead and copy paste again. And then below here, the next thing I want them to type in is a password. I'm just going to go ahead and include it as a password type. So again, we can't see what they're typing in as they're writing it, because in case somebody's sitting next to the user while they're signing themselves up, and then they look over their shoulder and sees what password they're typing in, we don't really want that to happen. So we need to have that sort of basic security here. The name I'm going to set to PWD, and the placeholder is going to be password. Then I'm going to copy paste the password field. Now, what I want to include here is a second password field that the user can repeat their password inside of, because if the user typed two different passwords in both of them, then they made some kind of a spelling error. So it's very important that we know that the user is using the right password that they intended, which is why I want them to repeat their password as they're signing themselves up. So the second password field is also going to be a password type. It is going to be named something different, because we don't need to have the same name. Well, we don't want to have the same name. So I'm going to call this one password-repeat. And the placeholder is going to be something like repeat password. Like so. So now that we have this, we do actually just need the button, and then we have a sign-up form that we can actually use inside the website. Now the email is something that is very important to have in order for us to include a forgotten password script inside the website. Because if later the user forgets their password, we do need to be able to send them an email that they can use in order to reset their password. So it's very important that we have an email field here. So at the bottom here, I'm just going to include a button, and the type is going to be submit. And the name is going to be signup-submit. Then inside the button, we're just going to go ahead and say sign up. And then we have everything we need to have in here at the moment. Later on, I will show you how to create error messages in case the user writes something wrong or does something weird that we don't want them to do inside the sign-up form. Let's say they forget to fill in a specific input, then we do need to write an error message for them. And I will show you how to do that later on in this video here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to style the sign-up page just like I did with the header and the main content inside the website. And again, if you want to have the exact same code as me, the files are going to be in the description of the video. If not, then just go ahead and include your own styling if you do want to style whatever we're doing this video here. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that really quick. And there we go. There wasn't actually a lot for me to style. I just needed to include one class inside the document here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to the website, refresh, and now when we click the sign up button at the top here, you can see we're taken to a sign up page with a sign up form. Now, what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and set up the database before we do any sort of PHP code, because we do need to have a database ready with a database and a database table that we can use in order to insert the information of the user when they sign themselves up inside the website. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go inside my browser and I'm going to go to my localhost /phpMyAdmin. And in case somebody is completely new at PHP, PHPMyAdmin is a place where we can set up databases for our websites. Right now, I do have PHPMyAdmin installed because I have XAMPP installed. So this is a local database on my local computer. And again, if you don't know how to install PHPMyAdmin, just go ahead and watch that video I linked to in the description where you learned how to install XAMPP, because you do install PHPMyAdmin by installing XAMPP on your computer. So go ahead and watch that episode if you don't know how to get into PHPMyAdmin. I explain everything in that video. So now that we're inside PHPMyAdmin, I'm going to go to the Databases tab up in the top here. Then inside the Databases tab, I'm going to create a new database. I'm going to call this one Login System Tut for Login System Tutorial. You can call whatever you want to call in this episode. And I'm going to say Create. Now that I have a database created called Login System Tut over here on the left side, as you can see, right now we have no tables inside the database. So we need to, when we sign the user up, store the information somewhere inside the database, and that is going to be inside a table called a users table. So I'm going to go inside the SQL tab at the top here, and I do know that you could simply go inside PHPMyAdmin and use their own system where you can quickly set up database tables and columns and that sort of thing. But I think it's a lot better practice to learn how to write the SQL yourself, so we're going to do that right now. Now inside of here, I'm just going to go ahead and zoom in so you can actually see what I'm writing. I'm going to write the SQL code that will set up our database table. So I'm going to just go ahead and look at my cheat sheet here because I do have it on the side so I don't make any errors. And what we're going to do is we're going to first of all say create table. And again, it will automatically know which database we want to create a table inside of, because right now I do have my login system tut database selected over here on the left side. So we're going to say create table, then we're going to give it some kind of name. I'm going to call it users in this example here. Then I'm going to say parentheses, double quote, or not double quote, semicolon. And then I'm just going to go down to a couple of different lines. So we have something to write in between here. Then I'm going to create the first column inside our table, which is going to be called ID users. Then I'm going to set it as a integer. And I'm going to set it to 11 inside the parentheses here. Then I'm going to set this one to auto_increment, which means that each time a new user signs up inside the website, this unique ID we're creating here for each user is automatically going to change by 1 each time a new user gets registered inside the table here. After auto increment, we're going to set a primary key. And then we're also going to set this one to not null, comma, next line, because we do need to include another column inside the database. This one is going to be called UID users. UID stands for username, at least in my head it does. You could also call it username users if you wanted to, or any sort of other name. So I'm going to call this one UID users, and I'm going to set the type of data we're going to insert as tiny text. Tiny text. Going to set this one to not null, which means that we can't have it empty. And then I'm going to go down to the next line here, and I'm going to create another one called email users. Then I'm going to set the text type to tiny text as well, not null. And then the last one down here is going to be the password. So we're going to say pwd users. And I'm going to set this one to a long text because we want to allow for as much text as possible when it comes to the password the user types in, because the longer a user's password is, the safer it is. So we don't want to put a restriction on how long the user can create their password. So we're going to set this one to long text. Now, if you don't know anything about SQL, what we have here is the name of the column. We have the type of data that we want to insert into the column. In this case, it's going to be a number, which is just going to allow 11 different characters after each other. Tiny text means that we have a certain number of letters the user can insert into the column without it cutting it off, because it doesn't allow more than this specific amount of characters. And long text is the longest one that allows for the longest amount of text inside the column here. Auto increment, like I said, means that you increase the number by 1 each time, so we don't need to do anything to this specific column each time a user signs up. It is done automatically. Primary key means that this is the primary column inside the specific table. You should always have a primary key inside a table when you create a new table. And not null means that you can't have it empty inside this column here. So we can't have null as a value inside any of these columns here. So make sure that the last one that you include down here does not have a comma behind it, because then you're going to get an error. So now that we have this, I'm going to go ahead and say go down here at the bottom. And as you can see, we don't have any errors. And inside my login system tut database over here, we do have a user's table inside the database with the different columns inside of it. So once I do register a user inside the database, we can see all the information on the users inside the database. So now that we have a database set up, we can go back inside our website. I'm just going to zoom back out. And inside our website, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create the PHP code that will allow the user to sign up inside the website. Then afterwards, we're going to allow for the user to log in and log out. So we're going to create all the PHP code now. So going back into our code or inside our text editor, I'm going to create a new file. This file is going to be called signup.inc.php, and I'm going to save it inside the includes folder. So I'm going to say signup.inc.php, and I'm going to save it. Now this is the file we referred to inside the sign up page. So if we were to go back to that specific page, you can see that inside our form, the action points to that specific page that we just created. So inside this specific page, we're just going to have PHP code that is going to run when you do actually click the sign up button, and then it's going to make a bunch of error handlers to check if the user made any sort of mistakes inside the form. And then if they didn't make a mistake, then we're going to sign them up inside the website. So inside this document, I'm going to just open up the PHP tags, and I'm not going to include the bottom closing PHP tags here, because you only need to have a closing PHP tag if you want to include HTML or something after the PHP code. So right now, because this is going to have pure PHP code, we're not going to include the closing tag. Inside of here, the very first thing we're going to do is check if the user did actually click the submit button when they got to this page, because you can technically access this page without clicking the submit button. If I were to go back inside the website, go to the top of the URL, I could access that page that we just started creating inside our text editor by going inside the URL and say I want to go to includes/signup.inc.php. If I were to click OK now, then we are inside that specific document that we're editing right now inside our text editor. We don't want the user to be able to get to the page this way. So we need to make sure that we do a double check that says, did they actually get here by actually clicking the sign up button inside the sign up form? So inside our document here, I'm going to say that we want to create a if statement. And inside the if condition here, we can go ahead and check for if the user did actually click the button by running a isSet method. And inside the isSet, we're going to check if we do have a post method called $_post brackets. And then we're going to check for the name called signup-submit. Because if we were to go back to the sign up page, you can actually see that the name down here for the submit button is signup-submit. So that's what we're checking for when that information gets sent to this document here. So now that we check for this, we now know that the user got here legitimately. So the next thing we need to do is we need to go ahead and run the connection to our database, which we haven't created yet. So what we're going to do is we're really quickly going to create another file, and I'm going to include that inside our includes folder, and it's going to be called dbh.inc.php, which stands for databasehandler.inc.php. And I'm just going to go ahead and save it. And then inside this specific file, I'm just really quickly going to just open up the PHP tags, just like before. And we don't need to close it as well. And then inside this file, we're going to give it the information we need in order to connect to our database, which is the one that I just created inside the browser here. So the information we need to have is, first of all, going to be which server did we actually create the database on. So I'm going to create a variable called server name. Going to set it equal to a string. Now the value inside the server name is going to be localhost, because right now I'm using a local server on my computer because I'm using XAMPP. So if you're also using XAMPP or MAMP or anything like that, then you're also going to have localhost inside here as your value. If you're using an online server, then you need to put in the server name for the online server you're using on an online website. Just log into the dashboard of your hosting company, and in there you can see what the server name is of your website inside the online version of your site. Now the next thing we're going to include is the username and the password for your database. Now for the local database that I'm using with XAMPP, the DB username, let's actually write that in a correct manner, there we go, is going to be called root, R-O-O-T. If you're using MAMP, it's also going to be root, but when it comes to the password, DB password, when you're using XAMPP like I am, it's going to be left empty. And then the last thing down here is going to be the database name. So we're going to say DB name. And I'm going to set this one equal to what we called the database inside phpMyAdmin. And I do think we called it login system tut. And again, if you call it something else, then go ahead and make sure it's called what you called it inside the database. So now that we have all the different parameters we need to have, I'm going to actually run a connection. So I'm going to say we have a variable called con, and then I'm going to run a MySQLi function. So I'm going to say MySQLi underscore connect, parentheses, semicolon, and then inside the parentheses, we just need to include these different parameters one at a time. So I'm just going to say we have the server name, we have the username, we have the password, and then we have the database name. And there we go. So what we can also do is we can actually go ahead and check if the connection did actually fail, because that is a really good thing to have. So I'm going to run a if statement down here, where I'm going to check if variable con does not work. Then I'm going to go ahead and kill the connection by writing die, which is a function as well. And then I'm going to write some kind of message, and I'm going to write connection failed. And then I want to write the actual error message that we got when it failed. So I'm going to say we have a function called MySQLi underscore connects underscore error, which is just going to throw out the specific error you might have if it does actually fail. So this is all we need to have inside our connection. This line up here is going to be the connection to our database. So by going inside our sign up page again, we can then require this specific page that we just created called dbh.inc.php. And now we have access to the variable con that we have inside the database file. So now we can, using this specific variable, gain access to the connection to our database. Do bear in mind, we don't need to have includes behind here because we are right now inside our signup.inc.php file, which means that inside our includes folder, that's where we are inside our website. So the dbh file is right next to it, so we don't need to write a path to it. Right after here, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and fetch the information from the form when the user signed up inside our website. So we're going to do the exact same thing as we did up here, where we used a post method in order to grab the data from the user. So we're going to go down here and say we have a variable, and I'm just going to go ahead and call this one username. I'm going to set it equal to a post method, which is not going to be called signup.submit, but instead is going to be called UID, because inside our signup form, the name for the input where we ask the user to type in their username, it is called UID. That's why we're writing that inside the post method. Then I'm just going to copy paste this line, and we need to copy paste it 3 more times. And then I'm going to change the name to email. And again, inside the post method, it is called mail. Inside the next one, we're going to write pwd or password. Then pwd inside the post method. And then we can call the next one something like password repeat. And then the name inside the post method is going to be pwd-repeat. So now we just fetch all the information that the user passed on from the sign-up form inside the website. And we can now take this information and do something with it. Before we take the information and put it inside our database and sign up the user, we do need to check if the user made a mistake inside the website. So we need to have a bunch of error handlers that does this for us. So I am just going to include the most basic error handlers that I could think of at the spot when I was making this tutorial. You can make so many error handlers for all sorts of things. You can check the length of the username, you can check if they wrote a valid email and that sort of thing. I'm just going to write some of the most basic ones. And you could always at one point just include more if you wanted to. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to check if the user wrote something in all the inputs inside our sign-up form. So if the user were to go to our website and say, I don't want to write any username, but I want to write an email and a password and repeat password, we want to check if they left one of the fields empty. So going inside our code, I'm going to create a if statement, and inside the condition, I'm going to run a PHP function called empty. And the empty function is just going to check if whatever we put inside the parentheses is empty. So if I were to take the username up here by referring to the variable called username, then if the user wrote nothing inside the username input, then we're not going to have anything set equal to this variable up here. So it will be empty. So if it is empty, then we want to create an error message and send the user back to the sign-up page saying, oh, there was an error here. But before we do that, we do also need to check for the other 3 that we have in here. So I'm going to say or by creating 2 pipe symbols right afterwards here. And then I'm going to just copy paste the empty function. And we can actually create a couple more of these, just so we have 4 in total, because we do need to check for 4 different inputs. Now, I do want to point out, this is the point where a lot of people make mistake when they watch my tutorial, because they forget to include all the different parentheses inside the if statement here. Do make sure that you have a opening and closing parentheses at the end and the beginning of the if statement, as well as an opening and closing for each variable inside the if condition here. Check for it. If you have a unexpected symbol, something as an error inside your website, then you made a typo. So make sure you check for it, because I do see a lot of people making typos, claiming and writing in the comment field of my videos that there's no typos, but there always is. So if you get a unexpected, I don't know, semicolon, parentheses or something as an error code, check for typos. It's very important. So now that we have this and went ahead and checked if any of these were left empty, we can go ahead and create an error message. The way I'm going to do that is by sending the user back to the sign up page with the error message. So I'm going to create a header function that is going to link them back to whatever page I referred to inside the header parentheses. So I'm going to say double quotes, location, colon, and then I want to take them back to the sign up page. So I'm going to go back a directory, because right now we're inside the includes folder, and I want to take them to the signup.php page. And then I'm going to write question mark, because I want to add some extra data behind the URL, and I'm going to include error is equal to empty fields. And I do also want to send back some of the information, because let's pretend for a second that the user went to your website inside the sign up form, wrote some information, click submit, and then they make an error and gets taken back to the sign up form. when this happens, the sign-up form is going to be completely empty again. So if you have a sign-up form where the user had the correct username, but not the correct password or something, then they need to retype the information all over again. So in some of these cases, we do want to send them back with some of the fields filled out again with the previous information they typed in, so they don't have to type everything in once again. So we can fix this by actually sending them back and including the information they already typed in inside the URL when we send them back to the sign up page. And then we just take that information, put it inside the sign up page, so it's already there when the user gets back to the page. So in this case here, I do want to include the username if they did actually write it in. I'm going to set it equal to the variable we have up here called username. So I'm just going to go ahead and say we have a variable included. Do make sure you put it after the double quote, like I just did here. Then I want to create another string. And then I also want to include the email if they did actually write it by saying ampersand. Email is going to be equal to the email we have up here. Punctuation and then the variable. Maybe we shouldn't put email because I do think that we need to have as little text as possible inside the URL. So I'm just going to write mail here. So if any of these inputs were actually filled out, it's going to get sent back to the sign up page. So we can actually go and check that if you want to. So let's actually go back inside our website, refresh the browser, and then let's go ahead and just type in, let's say, the email. Just going to write some gibberish, password, repeat password, sign up. Then you can see inside the URL, we get error equal to empty fields, and then the UID is going to be left empty right here because there was no UID, but the email that we did type in do get sent back inside the URL. So we can take that information from up here using a get method and then put it inside the form again once we do get back to the website. So one thing I do want to point out here is that we don't send the user back with their password because we don't want the password to be visible inside the URL. So they do need to repeat the password each time they make a mistake inside the form here. Now, before we continue, we should probably fill in the correct variables inside the empty functions we have down here. So there we go. Now everything is like it should be. And what we want to include as well, right after the header that we have down here, is a exit method. Because what is going to happen here is that if the user made a mistake and gets sent into this code in here, then the exit method is going to stop the script from running. We don't want to continue any code below here if they made a mistake inside the empty fields here. So that is what this specific function here does inside the code. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to check if the user submitted a valid email and a valid username inside the sign up form. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to include a else if statement down here at the bottom. So I'm going to write else if, parentheses, curly brackets. And I do want to point out that you can write the else if statement like this or like this. It doesn't really matter when it comes to PHP, it does the exact same thing. So inside the else if statement, I want to include some kind of condition that says, well, if we have a invalid email, then create an error message just like up here. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy the error message and paste it in inside the else if statement down here. The only thing we need to do to the error message is that we need to make sure we change the error message so it doesn't say empty fields, but instead it says invalid email or something. So we say invalid mail. And then of course we don't want to send the email back to the sign up page because it was invalid, so they need to type it in again. So I'm just going to delete the email from inside the URL that we're going to send them back with. Now inside the condition of the else if statement, we can write a very basic function that we have inside PHP that goes in and checks for a valid email. So I'm going to say we want to check not if it's valid, but invalid by writing a exclamation mark before the function. And then I want to write something called filter underscore var, parentheses. Then inside the function, we need to have two parameters. The first one is going to be the email that the user submitted. The second parameter is going to be how we want to check the data that we just submitted inside the function here, which in this case is going to be if it's a valid email. So the first parameter is going to be our email variable that we have up here, comma, and then we want to check for a filter underscore validate underscore email. And then it will automatically check if this is a valid email or not. in the past, we did actually need to write a search pattern that went into the whatever the user submitted, and we had to manually create different parameters that checked if this was a valid email. So this is a very simple, easy solution in order to check for a email that we have today. So now that we have this, the next thing we can do is we can go ahead and check for a valid password. Now, when it comes to passwords, we don't have the same luxury as having a function that just simply does everything for us. We do actually need to create a search pattern that searches the username to make sure we have proper characters and no symbols and that sort of thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete what we have inside the condition. And I'm going to go ahead and run a preg match function, which we have inside PHP. And I want to check if it doesn't match. So again, we're going to write exclamation mark. I'm going to write preg underscore match, parentheses. And then I'm going to write the search pattern that we want to check for. Now, I'm not going to go through search patterns in this episode because it is quite detailed and not really something I want to go over in this episode, but I do have a link in the description for a video where I explain everything when it comes to search patterns. So check that out if you need to check what we're doing here. So inside this function here, I'm going to create a search pattern. It's going to be called /. Then I'm going to create that upward pointing arrow. I'm not sure what it's called in English. Then I'm going to say brackets. And inside the brackets is going to be what we allow inside the search pattern. So in this case, it's going to be A through Z, and also capitalized A through capitalized Z. We're going to allow 0 through 9 because you also allow 4 numbers inside the username. And then afterwards, I'm going to say star, and then I'm going to say $/. So this right here is going to be the basic search pattern we're going to use in order to validate a proper name. Afterwards, we want to add a second parameter inside the preg match function. So I'm just going to say comma, and then I want to include the username because that's the one we're checking for in this example here. So now we have this, we need to go back down to the error message and change it up so it doesn't match the email one exactly, because I do want to create another error message if the username was the incorrect one. So down here I want to say we have an invalid UID, which is username in my head again. And instead of sending back the username, I want to send back the email. So I'm just going to write mail and set it to the mail variable we have up here, and send that back, because the user probably don't want to write the email one more time inside the sign-up form once they get pushed back to the sign-up page because they made an error. So now that we have this, there's a third error handler that is very similar to these two that I want to include, which is in case the user didn't write a proper email and they didn't write a proper username, then we need to send them back with a third URL type inside the URL when we send it back with an error. So right before these two else-if statements, I'm going to create another else-if statement. We do need to run this one first. That's very important, because otherwise it's just going to run one of these two, even though this specific error is actually thrown inside the website. So I'm going to copy paste what we have inside the condition for the improper email. I'm going to paste it inside the condition. Then I'm going to say and right afterwards using 2 ampersand symbols. And then I'm going to include the preg match that checks for a valid username and include that as well. So right now it is checking for a valid email and a valid username. And then again, we can send them back using the header function and throw them some kind of error. So I'm going to set the error for invalid mail and username. So I'm going to say mail UID, and we're not going to send any information back to the user because we don't want to give them information back filled into the form if it's not correct. So we don't want to send the username or the email back. And like I said, the password is sensitive data, so we don't want to send that back either. So we don't send anything back in this example here. So now that we have this, there's one more error handler I want to check for, which is if the two passwords the user typed in do not match each other. So right below here, I'm going to create another else if statement. And inside of the condition, I'm just simply going to check is password, or at least a variable called password, equal to password repeat. Now here, we do need to check if they're not equal to each other and then give them an error message. So right before the equal signs, I'm going to say exclamation mark, which is going to say, does this password not match the password repeat? Then I do want to create another error message and send them back to the sign up page. And in this case, I want to say password check, which is going to be the name of the error. So password check. Don't need to have that we don't need to have that capitalized. I'm just going to minimize it again. And I'm just going to go ahead and send back both the email and the username. So I'm going to say we want to just copy paste from up here because we don't need to type everything in again, and paste it in. There we go. Now that we have this, there's one more error handler that I want to include, which is not going to be inside an else if statement, because in this example here, I'm just going to create an else statement. If the user tried to sign up using a username that already exists inside the database, meaning that the username is already taken, then we also need to create a message for that. So we're going to create an else statement, and inside the else statement, we do actually need to connect to the database and check if we have any matching users inside the database. So inside this else statement, I'm going to first of all create a SQL statement that we want to run inside the database. So I'm going to say we have a SQL variable. I'm going to set it equal to double quotes, semicolon. Then inside the double quotes, I want to select UID users from the users table, where UID users is equal to the username that the user chose when they tried to sign up inside the website. Now, we're not going to take the username up here, copy it, and paste it inside the SQL statement, because we want to make sure we do this in a safe and secure way using something called prepared statements. Prepared statements is a way for us to run SQL statements inside the database without any person coming to our website and destroying our database by writing code inside the input fields. To give an example, if I were to go back to the website, go inside the sign up form, I could technically go inside the username input and write SQL code inside the input here, and then it would actually get run inside the database and destroy our database. And again, this is not something we want the user to be able to do. Again, there is some really evil people out there that might want to destroy our website. So we need to make sure we use prepared statements. Now, when we create a SQL statement that we want to run inside the database, we want to use placeholders inside the SQL statement. So right here, where we want to actually include the username and paste it in, we don't do that. Instead, we create a placeholder using question mark. And do bear in mind, you don't need to put that, or actually you shouldn't put that inside single quotes, because otherwise it's not going to work. So just go ahead and write a question mark. Now, in some cases where we might also check for a password, so we could say, let's go ahead and say, and PWD users is equal to something else, then we can also include a second placeholder if we need to. But in this case here, we just need to check, does the username already exist inside the database? So now that we have this, we can go down to the next line. We can create a prepared statement. So we create a variable called STMT, stands for statements. And I'm just going to go ahead and run a mysqli underscore STMT underscore init, which stands for initialize. Let's actually write that correctly. Init, parentheses. And then I want to make sure I run the connection that we have inside our database connection inside this specific parameter here. So I'm going to make sure that we have the database linked inside this page. We do. And then I'm going to go ahead and go back down to the bottom and refer to our connection variable that we have inside the database page right here. Now that we have this, we can actually go ahead and check if we can prepare this specific SQL statement and if it does actually work with our connection that we have down here. So I'm going to create an if statement. Inside the condition, I'm going to say exclamation mark because we want to check if it does not work. Always check for errors first when you create PHP code. At least that's a rule of thumb. You don't have to, but it's a really good rule to sort of follow when you create PHP code. So I'm going to check if mysqli underscore stmt underscore prepare failed. So I'm just going to go ahead and insert the statement we just created on top of it inside the parentheses down here. And then we're also going to go ahead and include the statement that we have up here, the SQL statement. And if it does fail, then we want to write some kind of error message in here. Again, we can just copy paste one of these up here, paste it in, send them back to the front page, or not the front page, but the sign up page with an error message that says something like let's go ahead and write SQL error, just so we have some kind of error message. So now that we have this, let's actually go ahead and close that off properly, like so. We can go ahead and keep going inside our script here. Now, I do want to point out that the way I'm writing else statements or else if statements inside my code here is by going down to the next line, because some people do recommend you do this because it looks more proper when it comes to PHP markup. But just to make sure it looks organized for you guys, I'm going to go ahead and write else statements at the bottom here. It doesn't make any difference. It's just the layout that I decided to create for the code. So now that we have this, we can actually go ahead and continue our script because there was no errors running this statement inside the database. Now what we need to do is we need to take the information the user gave us and put that inside the database and run it with this specific SQL statement. Now, because the statement up here was run first inside the database and we then later give it the information from the user, it is much safer to pass in information from the user into the database, because doing it this way is going to be run using a different method inside the database. So inside the else statement, I'm going to run a MySQLi underscore stmt underscore bind underscore param, which stands for parameters. And then I'm going to bind the parameters from the user to the statement we created up here, which means that we're going to take the information from the user and then send it later on to the database using the statement we created. So what I'm going to write inside the parameters inside this specific function is going to first of all be which statement we want to bind the information from the users to. In this case, we have the statement up here. Just going to include that. The second information is going to be what data type are we passing into this statement. We do need to write that. If you write S, then we insert a string into the statement. If you write B, then it's a Boolean. And if you write I, it's an integer. At least I do believe that is the letters they've used in order to indicate what kind of data type we're passing in here. If I made a mistake saying these letters, then I will write it on the screen here. But this is just basically the data type that we want to pass in. And because we just have basic text, which is going to be a string, then I'm just going to write S. Now, remember before when I said that we could have multiple placeholders inside the SQL parameter up here? Right now, we just have one question mark inside our SQL statement, meaning that I'm just going to have one S inside this specific parameter down here. If I had another one, then I needed to include a second S, because we need to tell it how many strings are we passing into this statement here. So after this specific parameter, I want to actually insert the information the user gave us inside the sign-up form. So I want to go back up here. I want to grab the username, and I just want to pass that in as a parameter. Again, if we also had the password, then I wanted to include a second S as well as a second parameter over here. So it would be password if we had to have multiple parameters, but we don't, at least not in this example here. So now that we've bound the parameters, the next thing we need to do is we need to actually execute our data from the user together with the SQL statement from up here. So I'm going to run a MySQLi function, MySQLi underscore stmt underscore execute, parentheses. And then we just need to go ahead and grab the statement and execute it into the database. So now that we did this, it will actually run this information from the user inside the database. After running the information inside the database, we now need to check, did we get a match when we ran it inside the database? If we did get a match, then it means that there is already a user that has that specific username. Therefore, we cannot have this user sign up with the same username. So the way we do that is again using another function. So we're going to say MySQLi underscore stmt underscore store underscore results, parentheses. What this basically does is that it just takes the result we got from the database and stores it back into the variable called stmt. Then what we can do afterwards is we can go ahead and actually check using a function how many results we have inside the variable called stmt. So I'm going to create a variable called result check. Going to set it equal to MySQLi underscore stmt underscore num underscore rows. So now checking how many rows of results did we get from the database. When we get information from a database table, we get them returned as rows. So if I have 2 matches inside the database, then I'm going to have 2 rows returned to me. And in this case, we should probably just have 1 row returned to us. Then I want to grab the statement and insert it inside the parentheses. And now variable result check is going to be equal to the number of results we got from the database. So it should either be 0 or 1. Because if we had 1 user inside the database that had the same username, then it's going to be 1. So now that we have this, we can actually go ahead and run another if statement. And we can go ahead and check, is result check greater than 0? If it is greater than 0, then again, we should return the user back to the sign up page with an error message that says username already taken. So I'm going to just copy paste the header function, and then I'm going to just change it so we have the error message saying not SQL error, but user taken. And again, in this case, you might also want to return the email so they don't have to write everything again. So I'm just going to copy paste the ampersand mail equal to email and then paste it right after here. There we go. So now that we did this, we just created the last error handler I wanted to include inside our login system. So the next thing we need to do is we need to actually sign up the user into the website, because from now on, there shouldn't be any sort of errors when it came to the user. So I'm going to create a else statement. Inside the else statement, we're going to do almost the exact same thing as we just did before here. We're going to run a SQL statement inside the database that is going to insert instead of selecting. And then we're going to do this using prepared statements like we just did here. So inside the else statement, I'm going to run another SQL variable. And I'm just going to go ahead and copy paste because you can just do that. And instead of select, actually we can just go ahead and delete everything we have in here. We're going to say insert into users, and then we're going to give it parentheses, values, parentheses. Then we need to write the name of the different columns we have inside the user table, or the users table we have inside the database. So if we go back inside the database, you can see we have an ID users, we have a UID users, an email users, and a password users. This is actually quite tiny, so you can't see it. But do bear in mind, when we created the table, I said that we set the ID users to auto increment, which means that it automatically updates each time we get a new user inserted into the database. So we don't need to do anything when it comes to the ID users. These 3, however, we do need to include inside the insert statement. So going back inside our code, I'm going to make sure that the first parameter inside the first parentheses here is going to be UID users. The next one is going to be mail users, and then the last one is going to be PWD users. And let's go ahead and check that this is actually correct. So I'm just going to say it's called email users. I do need to change that so don't get an error. There we go. And inside the values, we need to insert placeholders because we don't want to just paste in information from the user. Like I said before, it's not safe. So we're going to use placeholders in this example here. On the next line, we're going to go ahead and run a new statement like we just did up here. So I'm just going to copy it, paste it in, and then I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm just going to run a if statement. I'm just going to copy paste again, and I'm going to check if this statement here and this SQL statement do in fact work together. If we can actually run this SQL statement inside the database, then I'm going to throw them back to the sign up page with an error if that did not work. Else, we're going to continue here, just like we did before up here. We need to run 3 different MySQLite functions. However, when we do insert the data inside the bind parameter function, in this case here, when we copy pasted it, there's just 1 parameter. We do actually need to have 3, because inside our current SQL statement, we do have 3 different placeholders. So we do need to have 3 different S's, meaning strings, inside this specific function down here, which means that we're also going to have 3 different variables called password, and we're also going to have a email, which is going to be the second one. These do need to be in the same order as we wrote it up here. Do keep in mind of that. So I'm going to say variable, I think we called it email something. Now, this is where we're going to hash the password, because right now, if I were to just grab the user's password from when he submitted it from up here, then when I insert it into the database, it's going to be completely identical to what he wrote inside the input. And you might be thinking, isn't that what it's supposed to be because he wrote in a password, so shouldn't we take that password and insert that password into the database? Well, no. Because if a hacker were to gain access to our database in some sort of way, then we don't want to have the password written out as it is inside the column inside the database table, because then the hacker can tell what the passwords are of all the different users inside our database. The way we get around that is by hashing the password, which means that we're going to take the password and turn it into a bunch of different characters and letters and numbers that doesn't make sense. And then when the user logs into the website, we're going to take that bunch of random characters from the database and we're going to rehash it back into the original password and then check if it matches with the password the user typed in when he tried to log into the website. So we're not going to have this specific password here as a binding parameter inside our statement. Instead, right before we do this, I'm going to go ahead and hash the password. So I'm going to create a variable called hashed pwd. I'm going to set it equal to password underscore hash parentheses. And then inside of here, we need to include two different parameters. We need to include the original password. So we're going to say $password. And then we need to tell it what kind of way we want to hash the password. In this case, we're going to be using bcrypt, which is the latest version of hashing. Bcrypt is always going to be updated because it automatically updates whenever there is some kind of security breach using bcrypt. The people behind PHP always updates this hashing method. So this will be much better than a lot of hashing methods today. If somebody told you to hash using something called MD5 or SHA-256, then your login system is not going to be safe. It's very important you don't use those hashing methods because they are outdated and not safe anymore. So you need to use bcrypt when you want to create a secure password hash. So inside of here, I'm going to tell that I want to hash it using a default bcrypt hashing method. So I'm going to say password underscore default. There we go. And then I want to take this hash password and insert inside the database down here. So now that we did this, we just need to run the MySQLi statement execute, and we don't actually need to have this last MySQLi statement down here because that is if we want to fetch information from the database. Right now we're just inserting into the database, so this is all we need to do. So now that we did this, the user just signed up inside the website. So the next thing we need to do is we need to return them to the sign up page with a success message. So I'm going to say we send them back to the signup.php file with a success message that says something like, well, actually we could say sign up equal to success, like so. Now before we test this out, I do want to do one more thing, which is to go down at the bottom here, and I do want to close the statement that we created for these different statements up here, and I also want to close my connection to the database. This is not something you have to do. When we connect to a database using MySQLi, it does automatically close afterwards, but we still do it in order to save resources when it comes to PHP and MySQL. So it's very important that we close it if we want to make sure that the website doesn't run unnecessary resources. So if we go down to the very bottom here, right after the second last curly bracket that closes off whatever statements we have up here. Now we probably should have done this at the very beginning, because going down after we wrote all this code, trying to figure out which bracket belongs to which if or else if or whatever statement we have up here is a little bit confusing. But just go ahead and trust me that this is the place we need to insert this code. So right after the second last bracket, we need to go ahead and run a MySQLi underscore stmt underscore close parentheses, and then we want to insert the statement that we used in all the previous statements here, or the statement variable we created, which means that we're now closing off the statements. Then we also want to close the connection, so we're going to say MySQLi underscore close, and then I want to close the connection we have from inside the database file, which is variable con. Then as a last thing inside the website here, if I go down to the very bottom here and create another else statement, we could also go ahead and send the user back to the sign up page if they try to access this page without clicking the the sign up button from inside the sign up form, because remember at the very top we did check if we had a isSet signup.submit, which means that the code is only going to run if the user actually tried to sign up using the sign up form. So just in case they gained access to this specific page without clicking that button, we just send them back to the sign up page. So we're just going to send them back to the sign up page like this. So now we have the sign up script done, and we can actually go ahead and test this out. So if we were to go back inside our website, refresh, and then go inside the sign up form and say we want to, for example, say I want to create a username called Danny948A, which is a typical sort of username. I'm going to create an email. So I'm going to use my usemm2 email. And I'm also going to create a password. I'm just going to say test123, test123, sign up. And as you can see inside the URL, we get sign up equal to success. So if we were to go back inside our database and refresh it, you can now see we have a new user inside our database table where the ID is set to 1. UID for the user is called Danny948A. The email is in here, and the hashed password is in here as well. If you get an error here, because it doesn't insert the password into the database, it is because you did not allow for enough characters inside this specific column. So make sure you use the exact same SQL code as I did in order for it to allow the proper amount of characters inside this column here. So now we signed up a user into the database. The next part is how to log in the user inside the database, because we haven't done that yet. Okay, so I'm back again. I took a long coffee break because it hurts my throat if I speak too much when I make these long tutorials. So I'm back again, and while I was on my coffee break, I decided to edit the first part of this video just to see if I made any sort of typos and that sort of thing. I did actually make 2 typos, one of them being one that you guys might have made as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and go through them before we get on to the next part of this tutorial here. So inside the signup.inc.php file that we just created here, if you were to go back up to the error handlers and go to the password check, where we do actually check if the 2 passwords are identical. If you go inside the header function, right after the error is equal to password check, we need to make sure we include a ampersand right before we check for the username. So error equal to password check and UID equal to blah blah blah. So make sure you have that as well. Another error that you guys may not have, I'm not sure of it, is if you were to go inside the header file, header.php, go down to the bottom where you have the logout form. Inside my code here, inside my markup, have the name attribute set to login-submit. It's actually supposed to be logout-submit. So just make sure you have that before you continue. So now we have this, we're actually ready to get started on the next part. What we're going to do is, before we get on to the error messages that were supposed to show the user when they try to sign up, in case they make some kind of mistake, or if they do actually succeed in signing up, then we want to create some kind of error message or successful message inside the sign up form. Now we're not going to do that just quite yet, because I want to create the login script before we start creating the error messages inside the website. Because the login script is very similar to the sign up script, so while it's still fresh in our minds, I want to get started on the login script before we do anything else. So in order to create the login script, we're going to just make sure we have everything saved, and we're going to create a new file. I'm going to save this file inside the includes folder inside our root folder, and I'm going to save this one as login.inc.php. Now, the login file is going to be very similar to the signup file. If we were to go inside the signup.inc.php file and go to the very top, you can see that we have a if statement that checks if we did actually click the sign up button in order to access this page in here. We're going to do the exact same thing inside the login script. So going into our login file, I'm going to open up the PHP code. Just like this. We don't need to have the closing tag because this is a pure PHP file. And I'm just going to go and create a if statement that checks, did we actually click, or do we have a name attribute called login-submit inside this page here? Because if we don't have that, we want to send the user back to the front page because he tried to access this page in a not legit manner. So we don't want him to actually run this code inside the file here. So inside the isSet function, I'm going to go ahead and check for a post method. So $_post. brackets, and inside of here, I want to check for a login dash submit. Now, we're just going to go ahead and create the header function that sends them back to the front page if they did not get to this page legitimately. We didn't do that immediately in the sign-up script when we started creating the sign-up script, so I'm just going to go ahead and make sure we do that first. So we're going to create an else statement here. And inside the else statement, I want to create the same header functions as we have inside the sign-up script. So I'm just going to copy paste one of these. Actually, we can actually go ahead and copy paste the bottom one. That might be better because it's more simple. And I'm just going to go ahead and paste it in. Now, I don't want to send them back to the sign-up page. I want to send them back to the index page with some kind of message. Now, we're not really going to create the message for the index page here. We're only going to do that for the sign-up page because it's the same process. So we're just going to do the sign-up page, and then you can do the error messages on the index page if you want to. Inside the if statement, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to grab the connection to the database, just like we did inside the sign-up script. So I'm going to say we want to require the dbh.inc.php file. I want to make sure we close it off here at the end. And then afterwards, we want to grab the information from inside the login form that the user tried to submit to us. So we're going to say we have a variable. I'm going to call this one mail UID. And the reason for this is that when the user signs up into the website, we want to give them an option of either using the username or the email they tried to sign themselves up with inside the website. So if they decide to use the email or the username, we need to make sure we can actually do that inside the website. We're going to do that later. So for now, we're just going to go ahead and grab the information. So we're going to say we have a $_post, brackets, semicolon, and inside the brackets we want to grab the mail UID. I'm not sure what we called it, so let's just go back into the header.php file. It is called mail UID. So we're just going to go ahead and paste that in here, and then afterwards we're just going to go ahead and copy paste, and then we're going to change the second one to password, and then we're going to change the post method to pwd, at least the name for the post method. So now we have both the username or the email and the password. And the next thing we need to do is we need to go ahead and check if any of these were left empty when the user tried to log into the website. It's the same process as inside the sign-up form, so a lot of this you will find familiar from inside the sign-up form we just created. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and check for an if statement, and we want to check if these were empty. So we're going to run a empty parentheses, and again, this is the spot where a lot of people make mistakes because they don't have enough parentheses, or maybe they delete a parentheses or something. So make sure that all the parentheses are there when you do actually get when you get to this part and you receive an error. So inside of here, we're just going to go ahead and paste in the mail UID, and then we're going to go ahead and say or if password is empty. And then we're just going to go ahead and copy and paste it in here. Then we're going to copy paste the header function down here, because again, this is a error message, so we want to send them back to the front page with an error message if they did actually make a mistake. And we're just going to go ahead and include something inside the URL. So index.php question mark, and then we want to say something like error is equal to empty fields. Again, I have my cheat sheet over here on the side, so I'm just going to make sure we write this correctly. And then we can also go ahead and send back the username or something. In this case here, when it's not a sign-up form, I don't think you should send back information. So, but just if you want to, you could send back the username so they don't have to type it in again. Again, it's the same process as inside the sign-up form, so if you want to do that, just go ahead and do that. I'm just going to go ahead and send them back with an error message. Now, what I want to do is I want to create a else statement. Again, there's a lot of different error handlers you could possibly do here, but right now I just think we need to go ahead and check if they left anything empty. I think that's good enough for now. Now that we got to this point, we just need to check the database to see if there is a user that has this username or the email that the user tried to use when he tried to log into the website. And then we need to get the password from that user inside the database and check if it matches with the password the user tried to give us when they tried to log in. That might have sounded more complicated than it really is, but you will see it's very simple once we get started here. Inside the else statement, I'm going to go ahead and run a SQL statement that we want to send to the database. So I'm going to say we have a variable called SQL, double quotes, Inside the double quotes here, I want to run a select statement, and I want to select all from the users table. Just going to go ahead and make sure we write this correctly. From the users table. And I want to run it where UID users is equal to question mark, because we need to run prepared statements in order for this to be a secure system. So we need to use placeholders and then run prepared statements afterwards. Now, this is the point where we need to think for a second, because in this specific login system, I want to allow the user to log into the website with either a username or an email. So we need to make sure we include that into the select statement down here. So right now we want to check for a username, or I want to check for a email users that is equal to question mark. Again, it's the exact same thing here, and then we just want to add a semicolon at the end here. Just by including the email users column inside the statement here, we can go ahead and check for either a username or an email. So it's very simple to do here. So now that we have this, what we want to do is we want to actually initialize a new statement. So I want to create a variable called stmt or something else. I just like to call a statement because it makes sense. Then I'm going to write mysqli underscore stmt underscore init parentheses, and then we just need to initialize this new prepared statement by referring to the connection we have inside the dbh file. Again, this connection we have in here. So going back into the login form or the login script, I am just going to go ahead and write variable con inside the initialize statement, so we make sure we initialize it with the correct connection. Then afterwards, I want to actually run the SQL statement and at the same time check if it does actually work inside the database. And we do that the exact same way as we did before. So I'm going to create a if statement, and inside the condition, I want to check if it doesn't work when we run a mysqli underscore stmt underscore prepare. So we're preparing the statement by actually running the SQL string inside the database and checking if this specific statement that we created up here have any kind of errors inside of it that doesn't make sense compared to the database that we have. If we do get an error, it means that there's something wrong up here that you need to change, so make sure you look out for that. And I'm just going to go ahead and include the statement as the first thing and the SQL statements that we actually want to run. There we go. So now that we have this, we need to go ahead and create an error message if we did actually do this and it gave us an error because something was wrong up here. So I'm just going to go ahead and revert back to the front page with a SQL error, just so we know specifically what kind of error we're receiving here. Afterwards, I'm going to go ahead and run a else statement. And then inside the else statement, we do actually want to grab the information that we got from this specific select statement up here. So we're going to go ahead and run a mysqli underscore stmt underscore bind underscore param, because now we want to pass in the parameters from the user that they gave us when they tried to log into the website into the database and see if we can actually get a result from this SQL statement up here. So inside the parentheses here, we first of all want to include the statement that we want to send it in with. And then afterwards, we want to tell it what kind of data that we're trying to send to the database. Right now it's 2 strings. So I'm just going to write SS, comma, and then we want to send in the actual data into the database. So right now we have a mail or username as the first one. And then we have a password. So I'm just going to paste those 2 in. Afterwards, we need to actually execute this specific or these specific parameters we just added here, so we can actually get a result from the database. So I'm going to run a mysqli underscore stmt underscore execute, like so. And then I want to execute this statement up here that we just binded to these parameters over here. So now that we executed it, we can now go ahead and grab the actual results and insert them into a variable we can then do something with afterwards. So on the next line here, I'm going to create a variable called result, and I'm going to set it equal to mysqli underscore stmt underscore get underscore result, parentheses. And then I want to actually get the result from the statement up here. So right now, all the information that we got from the database using the select statement is going to get inserted inside this variable here. Now, even though we have a variable called result that is set equal to the data from the database, we can still risk that we didn't actually get any sort of data from the database, meaning that $result is going to be equal to nothing. Now, the reason for this is that the first check we did up here only checks if this statement works with the database. It doesn't actually check if we got a result from the database. So down here, where we did actually run the actual data from the user into the database, we need to run another if statement that checks if we did actually get a result from the database, meaning is $result empty, or is there actually something inside this variable here? So the way we're going to do that is by saying we have an if statement, and then in here, I want to check if we have any sort of results, and then I want to set it equal to a variable if we do actually have any results from the database. So we're doing two things at the same time, just like we did up here. So inside the condition here, I want to set a $row equal to a mysqli underscore fetch underscore a sock, which means that we're fetching the data from this result variable we have up here, and we're going to put it inside a associative array that we can actually use for something inside our PHP code, because right now $result is just the raw data that we got from the database, but we need it to be a sort of format that we can work with in PHP, which right now is going to be a associative array. Now, if we didn't get any data from the database, then I want to create an error message. So underneath the if statement, I want to create an else statement. And I want to go ahead and just include another error message, just like we did up here. And this time we could call it something like no user, because there's no user inside the database that matches the either the username or the email that the user tried to log in with. And what I want to do here is inside the if statement, I want to go ahead and grab the password from the user if we did actually have a user with that username or email. And then I want to take that password from the database, and then I want to hash the password that the user tried to log in with and see if the two matches. And that's basically what we're trying to do here in order to tell if the user is the correct user who tried to log into the website. So inside the if statement, what I want to do is I want to create a variable that I'm going to call something like password check, pwd check. And I want to set it equal to password underscore verify. And what this function basically does is, like I said, it's going to take the password the user tried to use to log in, and then it's going to take the password from the database, and then it's going to hash the password the user tried to use and see if they match together. So the first parameter we're going to have in here is going to be the password the user tried to use to log into the website. And then the second parameter is going to be the password from the database of the user that the user tried to log in as. So what we're going to do is we're going to say we have $row brackets, and then I want to say I want to grab the, what is it called, the pwd users column from inside the search result that we got from up here. And then I want to check if the database password matches with the login password he tried to give us. Then afterwards, what we have here is a true or false statement, because password check is going to be equal to either 0 or 1, which is a Boolean. And we can use that true or false statement in order to check if the user should actually be logged into the website. So I'm going to run another if statement here. And inside the condition, I'm going to check is password check equal to false. If it's equal to false, then we shouldn't log the user into the website because it's not the right user. So we're just going to go ahead and send him back to the front page with a error, wrong password. But if he's the right user, then it's going to be a true statement. So we're going to say we want to run a else if statement. You could also run a else statement, but I do want to make sure that we check if it's equal to true. Now you could argue that password check is either going to be true or false. There's no other answer here because it's a Boolean. But in case some kind of mistake happens and password check is equal to a string or a number or something that is not a true or false statement, then I want to make sure that we don't just run an else statement that is going to lock in the user because some kind of error happened inside our code. So I want to make sure I run a else if statement in order to lock in the user down here. And then inside the condition, I want to check is password check equal to true. And then we can actually go and run an else statement down here that says in case some kind of mistake happened and password check is not going to be a true or false statement. I don't know how it could happen, but it's good to have because we need to make sure it's secure. Then we could send the user back with the same error message, just to have it here. So inside the else if statement, we want to log in the user to the website because the user just typed in the right username or the email and the right password. So now we need to log him into the website. What we need to do in order to do this is we need to start a session, because the way the login systems work is that we create a global variable that has the information of the user when he's signed into the website. And then we just simply inside the website check, is the global variable available or is it not available? So the type of variable that we want to store globally is going to be what is called a session variable. So in order to have the session variable visible inside the website, we need to start what is called a session. So the way we start a session is by saying session underscore start, right down here where we do actually create the login. And then we want to set session variables equal to information we have about the user inside the database. So what I want to do is I want to create a session variable by saying variable underscore session brackets is equal to, and then I want to grab information from inside the database. So just like we did up here when we grabbed the password of the user, I want to set it equal to, not the password, but I want to set it equal to, let's say, the ID of the user inside the user table. Then I want to give the session variable a name. So inside the brackets, I want to call it something like, let's call it user ID. And then I want to go and copy this, paste it below here. And then I want to create a second session variable that could be called something like user UID. So we also have the username. So I can say UID users. Again, these are the names of the columns we have inside the database. So if I were to go back inside the browser, and like I said, inside our database, the names I'm referring to is the column names of our users table. So ID users, UID users, email users, and password users. Now, you probably shouldn't save the password users inside your website because it's not really secure. So just go ahead and save information that is not sensitive inside the website. Now, we could also store the email of the user, but I don't think we're going to use it inside the website. So I'm just going to go ahead and store the ID and the UID of the user for now. So now that we have this, the next thing we need to do is we basically just need to take the user back to the index page, but this time with a success message. So we're going to say something like success, or we could actually say login is equal to success. And then we just want to exit the script like we would at any other time. And now we do actually have a working login system. Okay, so before testing this out, I did actually notice I made a few errors. So before we test out the login system, I do want to make sure that you guys don't have the same errors as I made. I did actually make 2 errors inside the code here. Going back up to the top where we have the MySQLi statement by parem function, we need to make sure that the second parameter that the user passed in is not going to be the password, but the same variable as we used before. Because remember, when we run in the select statement, we check for the username and the email. We don't check for the username or email and the password. We want to make sure we have the same variable in both places. The second thing we want to fix is that down here where we have the if statement that says $row equal to MySQLi fetch a suck, we want to make sure we include the $result inside the function we have down here. So we do actually get something to insert inside $row. So having fixed those errors, there's one more thing we need to do. Because remember, I said that we have session variables we need to check for in order to tell if the user is logged in or not. In order to actually see the session variables, we need to make sure we have a session started on all the pages inside the website. Meaning if I were to go to the index page of the website, which is the front page, and try to log in when there's no session started inside the index page, then we can't check if there's session variables available to us inside the website. So we need to go inside the header.php file, which is the file that is on top of all the regular pages inside the website. And at the very top up here, before anything else, we're going to open up our PHP tags, and then we're going to start a session to make sure that we have a session started on all pages inside the website. So we're going to say session underscore start, and there we go. So now we do actually have a fully working login system. If I were to go back to the website and try to log into the website, we should actually get logged into the website. Now, there is something we need to do before we do that, because if I were to go into the website and actually log into the website, let's actually zoom out so it's normal. Right now we have two messages inside our index page. We have one that says you are logged out and one that says you are logged in, meaning that none of these are going to change if I'm logged in or if I'm logged out of the website. So we need to make sure we do just have one message if we're logged in or logged out. Going into our index page, I'm going to go down where we have our paragraphs, and I'm going to open up the PHP tags like so. Then inside the PHP tags, I'm going to create an if statement that checks if we have the session variables available to us inside the website. If we do not have them available to us, then like I said, we're logged out of the website. There's nobody logged in. But if we do have the session variables, then we're logged into the website. So what I want to do is I want to create a isSet function that checks if we have something available to us. So I want to check, do we have a $_session, brackets, not curly brackets, but brackets. And then I just need to check for one of the session variables. So I could just check for a user ID, just to check for something. Then inside the if statement, I'm just going to copy paste one of these paragraphs down here. Now we can actually delete both of them after we copied just one. And I'm going to echo out one of these paragraphs inside of the if statement. Then afterwards, I want to run a else statement, because if we're not logged into the website, then I want to run another echo. So I'm just going to go and copy paste the echo. Now, inside the if statement is going to be the message if we're logged into the website, meaning that we're going to say you are logged in. Inside the else statement, I'm going to say you are logged out. So going inside the website and refreshing, you can see that right now it says you are logged out. Now I do want to point out I created another user because I couldn't remember the password for the first user in here. So I created another one called test. So I'm just going to go ahead and log in with test and the password being test. And then when I log in, you can now see that we get a login success message, and we are also logged in to the website. And the content changed on the page depending on if we were logged in or not. And believe it or not, this is actually the exact same process that we use in order to change a lot of content inside websites when a user is logged in or not. Because like Facebook, if you were to log into Facebook, then Facebook changes quite a lot if you're logged in compared to when you're not logged in. And it's basically done just by running a if statement that checks if you're logged in or not, and then an else statement that shows other types of content if you're not logged in. This is a very basic thing, and this is how you change all the content on your website if you're logged in or not. Again, I'm mentioning this because a lot of people ask me about how do you change content when you're logged in or not into a website, and this is how you do it. So now that we have this, we just need to create the logout button, because right now we're logged into the website, but how do we log back out again? So before we create the logout script, I just want to make sure that if we're logged into the website, we cannot see the login form inside the header. If we're logged out of the website, I want to make sure that we can't see the logout button. So going inside our header file, I just want to go down to where we have the login and the logout buttons. I want to make sure we run a bit of PHP code, so we're just going to open up the PHP tags, and then I want to make sure that inside the PHP tags we do the exact same thing as we did inside the index page in order to show that message. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy paste the if statements and the else statements, and I want to paste it inside what we have here. Then I want to just replace everything inside the if statement with the logout form, because we only want to see the logout form once we're actually signed into the website. So I'm just going to delete it and paste it inside the first echo up here. And then I want to grab the login form and the sign up button and just go ahead and delete them and paste them into the else statement down here, just like this. Then if I were to save it and go inside the website, refresh, you can now see that because we're logged into the website, we only see the logout button. So now we're going to go ahead and open up a new file. We're going to save it inside our includes folder as logout.inc.php. And then we just need to log out the user inside this file here. This is a very small file we're going to create. We're just going to go ahead and open up the PHP tags. And then inside the PHP tags, we're just going to go ahead and run a session_start, because we need to have it started in order to actually end it. So we need to actually start the session, and then we need to run a session underscore on set. Now what this function basically does is that it takes all the session variables we created when we logged in, and it deletes all the, what you call it, the values inside those session variables. So right now the ID and the username are deleted from those session variables. Then afterwards we want to actually destroy the sessions we have running inside the current website. So we want to say session underscore destroy parentheses. And this is basically all we need to do here. Then afterwards, we just want to run a header function because we need to take the person back to the front page, and just go ahead and say we want to include a location and set it to .index.php. And there we go. That's all we need to do. So going inside the website, refreshing, clicking log out, you can now see that we're logged out of the website. We have the message here that says you are logged out, and we also have the login form and the sign up button up here. So again, just to test it, we log in. As you can see, we're logged in, and we log out. So it's very simple, as you can see. So now you have a fully working login system, but before we end off the episode, I want to create a few error messages inside the sign up form when the user tries to sign up and he makes some kind of error or something. So just to show you how to do that before we end off the episode, I'm going to go inside the sign up form, and I'm just going to go ahead and do something. Like, I'm not going to fill in the username. Boom, 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 boom. And as you can see, we get a few errors up here. We get error, empty fields. UID is equal to nothing because I didn't write a username, and email is equal to blah blah blah. So what I want to do here is I want to go inside my sign up to PHP file, and at the place where I want to create an error message, I'm going to open up my PHP tags. So I think we should create an error message right below the H1 tag that says sign up. So I'm just going to go ahead and open up my PHP tags like so. And inside the PHP tags here, we're going to create an if statement. Now, if we get a error inside what do you call the URL up here, so right now it's error equal to empty fields, then I want to run some error messages, and I want to run a specific error message depending on the error. So what I want to do is I want to check if we have a error set inside the URL. So I'm going to run a isSet function. Then I want to check for a $_get, because when we have something equal to something inside the URL, we can grab it using a get method. And I'm just going to go and check for a error inside the URL, because right now when we check for something, error is equal to empty field. So we're just checking if we have this error get method inside the URL. So going back inside our code, I'm just going to go ahead and create a specific error message depending on what error is equal to. So I'm going to create another if statement inside this if statement, and then I want to check if we have get error equal to a specific string. So right now we have empty fields, so we can actually go and check for that one. And if we have it equal to empty fields, then I just want to create a paragraph that has some kind of message in it. Now I'm just going to go and copy what I have over in my notes because it's very little code and I don't want to just write it. As you can see, we just need to echo a paragraph and then write a message inside of it. So right now I wrote fill in all fields, which is going to show inside the website if I do actually refresh the browser. So as you can see here, we do get a error message. The reason it's styled is because I did include a class inside the paragraph, and because I have a style sheet attached to my website, I do actually get a style. So just go ahead and style it if you need to style it inside your style sheet. Now that we have this, we can actually run a else if statement. So I'm just going to say else if, and then I just want to do the exact same thing, but this time I want to check for something besides empty fields. So this time we could check for invalid UID email. And again, these are just what we have inside the sign-up script. So if I were to go in here, go back up to the top where we have all the error handlers, you can see we have empty fields, we have invalid mail UID, invalid mail, we have invalid UID, we have password check. We have a bunch of different error messages in here that we get inside the URL depending on the error message we get from inside the sign-up script. So I'm just going to go back inside our sign-up.php file, and I'm just going to go ahead and fill in all these different ones that we need to have depending on what kind of error we want to get. And I'm just going to go and copy them from over here. So as you can see, I'm basically just copy pasting, and then I'm just changing the error message and then writing something else inside the website depending on the error message. Now, what if we do actually get a success message instead of an error message? Well, then what we need to do is we need to go down below the first if statement that we have up here, where we just check for a error inside the URL, and we're going to create a else if statement. So I'm going to say else if parentheses, curly bracket, and then what I want to do is I want to check for a whatever message we wrote if we did actually get a success message. So if I were to go inside the sign up script and go to the bottom, you can see that if we do get a successful sign up, we get a sign up inside the URL that is equal to success. So I'm going to go inside the sign up form, and I'm just going to copy paste what we have up here. So I'm just going to copy paste the get method, and I want to check for a sign up that is equal to success. There we go. And then I just want to run another echo inside this else if statement. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy paste from over here inside my notes. So I'm just going to say I want to check for, or we want to run a sign up successful message inside the browser. So if I were to go back in here, refresh, and say I want to, I don't know, say test 1. Let's go ahead and actually run a proper email, because otherwise we're going to get an error message. And we're going to say test and test. Sign up. And as you can see, we get a sign up successful message inside our website here. Okay, so this is how you create a basic login system inside a website. And again, there's a lot of things you can do to improve and do different things to a login system. But this is how a login system basically works when you want to create one for a website. So I will create episodes where I teach you how to create a forgotten password system. I will teach you how to create a user profile page inside the website. I'm just going to go ahead and get around to those episodes after this one. And once they're ready, I'm going to go ahead and link to them in the description of this video here. Now, in case you got a error message during your tutorial here, I will go ahead and include any kind of error messages and fixes for them in the description as well. So if you get some kind of error message, go ahead and check the description to see if my solution for it did help you out in order to fix your error. So I hope you enjoyed this episode.
Okay, so that's it for today. I hope that you will be able now to learn on how to use, of course, different uh, types of PHP forms, the validations, no, and even now you will be able to create your login and sign up, no, in a website. Okay, so you may proceed to our activities. Okay, good luck everyone. Enjoy coding.